Chapter 2467, Legacy Room Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. A spatial tear appeared before the entrance of the Fortress Lord's mansion as Shi Feng teleported out of the Legacy Gate. Currently, several figures were resting before the entrance, every one of which looked exhausted, as if they had just fought a battle that lasted several days and nights. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their bodies were felt weak and sore all over. Guild leader? A trace of surprise flashed in Kola's eyes when he saw Shi Feng coming out of the spatial tear. Aside from Kola, Shadow Sword, Turtledove, Alluring Summer, and Luafei who sat beside him were similarly stunned by this scene. They knew what the situation inside the Legacy Gate was very clearly. Out of their team of 10, the one with the highest chance of clearing the first level was undoubtedly Shi Feng. Now, however, Shi Feng was actually the sixth person to come out of the Legacy Gate. This development boggled their minds. After all, in terms of combat standards and basic attributes, Shi Feng was the strongest among them. Even the standard of his mana body was unmatched. Theoretically, even if Shi Feng failed to conquer the Sacred Mountain's first level, he still should have been the last one to come out of the Legacy Gate. Ignoring the strange gazes Kola and the others were giving him, Shi Feng asked, "Only the 5 of you have come out?" Big Sis Fire and the others are still inside. Kola nodded stiffly. They made such huge improvements during this period? Shi Feng was surprised by this situation. The fact that Fire Dance and the others remained inside the Legacy Gate until now meant that they were close to clearing the Sacred Mountain's first level already. The first level of a Gold Gate's Sacred Mountain. Shi Feng had personally experienced the difficulty of the Gold Gate's trial. From his experience, everyone aside from Yan Tianqing shouldn't have much of a chance at clearing the Sacred Mountain's first level. After all, the Gold Gate's trial placed much more importance on players' combat standards than on basic attributes. No matter how powerful their basic attributes were, their attacks couldn't be stronger than those of Tier 3 NPCs that had fully unlocked their mana bodies. Meanwhile, of those that had come to the Western continent with Shi Feng this time, Aqua Rose, Fire Dance, and Violet Cloud, 3 of the 4 players that had entered the Tower of 4 Gods, remained inside although he had already exited. Gentle Snow was staying in the Black Dragon Empire to handle the guild's affairs. Shi Feng never thought that Aqua Rose, Fire Dance, and Violet Cloud would last this long inside the Legacy Gate. Although he had already known that all 3 of them had reached the Void Realm standard and that Violet Cloud had even learned a bronze combat technique, they still shouldn't be capable of surviving until now. However, Shi Feng quickly shook his head, not dwelling on the matter. After all, the stronger Aqua Rose and the others became, the better it would be for Zero Wing. Following which, he looked at Kola and the others and asked, "Right, what kind of gains did you get inside? How much of your mana body did you manage to unlock?" The real treasure hidden inside an ancient fortress was the mana body legacy. Hence, it did not matter whether players managed to clear the fortress's legacy trial or not. The crucial part was how much players learned from the legacy trial. If players simply focused on clearing the trial and failed to learn anything, then it would be a huge loss. "I've already unlocked it to 75%, Kola replied in a slightly prideful tone. Although he was the first person to exit the Legacy Gate, he had unlocked the most potential out of their group of 5. In fact, had he managed to push through one more batch of opponents, he might have been able to unlock 80% of his mana body's potential. It should be known that every 10% potential unlocked in a mana body would enhance one's normal attacks, skills, and spells significantly. Upon hearing Kola's prideful tone, Shadow Sword and the others eyed him with contempt. Kola had unlocked merely 5% to 10% more potential than they had. That was nothing for him to boast about. Shortly after Shadow Sword and the others finished reporting their progress, 4 spatial tiers suddenly opened up before the Fortress Lord's mansion, one after another. A figure then walked out of each spatial tear. These 4 figures belonged to none other than Aqua Rose and the rest of the Zero Wing contingent. At the same time as Aqua Rose and the others exited, an additional bronze mark appeared on Shi Feng's Fortress Lord's token. The knights on the second level are simply overpowered. Every one of their attacks rivals mythic monsters. Who could possibly block those attacks? Yan Tianqing's expression turned ugly when he was teleported out of the Legacy Gate. "You cleared the first level?" Shi Feng asked as he took in Yan Tianqing's miserable state. But the second level is far too difficult. Those knights are basically at the Tier 4 standard already, and they're even more difficult than mythic monsters, Yan Tianqing replied, nodding with some disappointment at this outcome. "Not bad. The second level's knights all possess gold magic bodies. Their magic bodies are not the slightest bit inferior to yours. Moreover, their magic bodies are fully unlocked while yours is not. If multiple knights gang up on you, it is only natural for you to get defeated, Shi Feng said, not the slightest bit surprised by this outcome. He then swept his gaze over Yan Tianqing's group of 4 and asked, "How far have you gotten in unlocking your mana bodies?" NPC knights that possessed gold mana bodies simply had too large an advantage over current players like themselves. Even Shi Feng would have to activate Heavenly Dragon's power to block their attacks. "I currently have it unlocked up to 90%, Yan Tianqing reported, slightly disappointed. "It would be great if I could have continued fighting for a little while longer." Kola and the others gazed at him enviously upon hearing that. They never thought that the second level's NPC knights actually possessed gold mana bodies. Gaining the opportunity to observe these knights would definitely provide them with significant help. "I'm just a little ways off myself. I managed to unlock mine up to 95%. If I could continue observing for 20 more minutes, I might have been able to unlock my mana body completely," Aqua Rose said, thoroughly bummed. The mana that the second level's knights exuded was simply too frightening. Every one of their attacks carried power close to the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, they also possessed very high combat standards, basically rivaling Refinement Realm experts. Worst of all, her ability to wield mana was restricted due to the harsh environment. Fire Dance and Violet Cloud similarly shook their heads in frustration. Although both of them had unlocked 95% of their mana body's potential, they still couldn't contend against the second level's knights. "Right, guild leader, Divine Tribe contacted me previously. They said that there is something they need to discuss with us. However, as we were still inside the Legacy Gate, I told them that we had some urgent matters to deal with and had them rest inside their temporary residence for now," Aqua Rose suddenly said. "That isn't an urgent matter," Shi Feng said, chuckling. "It'll be the same if we go after all of you have fully unlocked your mana bodies." "Unlock our mana bodies?" Aqua Rose was puzzled by Shi Feng's words. They had just come out of the Legacy Gate. Without the help of the Legacy Gate, it would be incredibly difficult for them to make any more progress. Fully unlocking their mana bodies might even take up to a fortnight. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. View, MHO. An ancient fortress's Legacy Gate is indeed the fastest place for players to unlock their mana bodies. However, the Fortress Lord's Mansion has something called a Legacy Room. Although its training effects aren't as excellent as the Legacy Gates, it allows players to experience a fully unlocked mana body for 3 minutes. "I believe this experience should be of significant help for you all," Shi Feng said, nodding. The Legacy Room was the core of the Fortress Lord's Mansion. Only after players obtained the rights to control the Fortress Lord's Mansion would they be allowed to use it. Moreover, the room could be used only 12 times a month and each player could use it only once a month. During Shi Feng's previous life, the various superpowers that controlled an ancient fortress allowed only peak experts that were close to fully unlocking their mana bodies to make use of the Legacy Room. Now that Aqua Rose and the others had managed to unlock at least 70% of their mana body's potential, they would have a very high chance of fully unlocking their mana bodies if they utilized the Legacy Room. Shi Feng naturally had to let them try. After saying so, Shi Feng removed the seal on the Fortress Lord's Mansion and let everyone inside. Chapter 2468, Silver Marks Effects. As Shi Feng and the others walked into the Fortress Lord's Mansion, they felt as if their exhausted mental state had suddenly been refreshed. "The mana density here is so high," Aqua Rose exclaimed when she sensed the mana inside the mansion. "It's at least twice as high as in Zero Wing City." Out of all the guild towns and cities in God's domain, Zero Wing City's mana density was the highest. This was also why Zero Wing City remained extremely popular with players even though it was located within Star Moon Kingdom's borders and in a map that was much lower level than mainstream players. Currently, the city's daily player traffic still exceeded 6 million. In Star Moon Kingdom, Zero Wing City's player traffic ranked third, inferior only to Star Moon City and White River City. However, despite the sparse mana in Star Valley, the inside of the Starlight Fortress's Fortress Lord's Mansion had a mana density at least twice as high as Zero Wing City's. Of all the places Aqua Rose could think of, only the ambient mana in the Holy City of Titan was comparable to this mansion's in terms of density. With such an excellent environment, even training bronze combat techniques won't be a problem, Yan Tianqing commented, his eyes similarly glowing with excitement when he sensed the mana around him. Practicing combat techniques placed a huge burden on players' concentration. If the environment did not possess sufficiently dense mana, their concentration regeneration rate wouldn't be able to keep up with their consumption rate. Players would have to rest for a long time after practicing their combat techniques a few times. That sort of training would be inefficient. Meanwhile, bronze combat techniques were particularly exhausting to practice. Each use of a bronze combat technique consumed several times more concentration than an advanced combat technique. Moreover, if players hadn't mastered the bronze combat technique, using it would place an even greater burden on their stamina and concentration. Hence, the various superpowers had very few peak experts that had successfully learned a bronze combat technique even now. This was also the case for Zero Wing. This place isn't just useful for practicing bronze combat techniques. Looking at the excitement on everyone's faces, Shi Feng pointed at a nearby locked room and explained, "There are also mana training rooms here. In there, players can practice not only combat techniques but also mana control. The efficiency of training inside one of these rooms is several times higher than training in the outside world. It is no exaggeration to say that these rooms are one of the best places for training." As a fortress that had existed since ancient times, the Starlight Fortress was not as simple as it appeared to be. The standard of magical technology that the fortress possessed was something that current kingdoms and empires could only admire. This was also why the various superpowers during Shi Feng's previous life had contested over ancient fortresses desperately. Unfortunately, the Starlight Fortress was only a small fortress. Its fortress lord's mansion also wasn't very large, with only 5 floors in total, 3 above ground and 2 underground. Meanwhile, every one of these floors was enhanced by all sorts of magic arrays that increased the density of the ambient mana, as well as accelerated the concentration recovery rate of players. Players could also accumulate the double EXP buff while within the Fortress Lord's mansion, so they wouldn't have to worry about falling behind in terms of levels, even if they spent a long time training within the mansion. As for the mana training rooms, the mansion had only 32. A medium fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion would have double the number, whereas a large fortress would have 150. The training capability of a large fortress was several times greater than that of a small fortress. With the Starlight Fortress, Zero Wing would be able to nurture only a small number of the guild's experts. However, this was the best Shi Feng could do right now. After all, the difficulty of capturing medium and large fortresses was many times higher. Generally, large fortresses had superior mythics guarding them, while medium fortresses also had a small chance that a superior mythic would appear as its final guardian boss. Medium fortresses would also have over a dozen other mythic monsters inside. A medium fortress simply wasn't something a few players and a Tier 4 hero could capture at this stage of the game. In fact, during Shi Feng's previous life, the various superpowers had managed to capture Star Valley's medium and large fortresses only after Tier 4 players had come into existence. After Shi Feng gave everyone a simple introduction, he brought them to the mansion's second basement floor. The second basement floor was not very large and had only 2 rooms. One of these rooms was the core room responsible for controlling the fortress's magic array, while the other room was sealed shut by a large door made out of magic crystals. The room with the magic crystal door happened to be the most precious location in the entire Fortress Lord's mansion. The Legacy Room. This place was second only to the Legacy Gate in terms of helping players unlock their mana bodies. In the past, it had also been the most important location for the various superpowers for nurturing guild experts. In God's domain, the mana body might be considered merely a tool to support players, since it was only a matter of time before players fully unlocked their mana bodies after reaching Tier 3. However, the speed at which players unlocked their mana bodies would give rise to a marked disparity. This was because players' control over their mana bodies and combat styles would undergo significant changes after they unlocked their mana bodies. Meanwhile, they would need time to adapt to these changes. In addition, if players wished to improve their mana bodies further, in other words, break through the 100% threshold, they would first need to unlock their mana body's full potential. Only after doing so could they start attempting to break through the 100% threshold. The player's success would depend on whether they had taken the correct path or not. If players discovered that they had made a mistake, they could still change their method of approach in unlocking their mana body. Hence, the sooner one unlocked their mana body in God's domain, the better. Of course, the Legacy Room had a flaw. It could only allow players to experience what it felt to have a fully unlocked mana body based on their current foundations. It would not point out a clear path for players to take. Even so, having the help of the Legacy Room was still many times better than randomly experimenting in the outside world. After arriving before the 4-meter-tall and 3-meter-wide crystalline door, Shi Feng held up the Fortress Lord's token and chanted the incantation recorded on it to trigger the magic array etched into it. In the next moment, the token's magic array released a silver glow that resonated with the magic array carved into the crystalline door. The door's magic array likewise released a silver glow. Immediately afterward, the tightly shut door started opening, and everyone instantly felt mana of much greater density flowing out of the legacy room. When bathed in this mana, everyone felt their mind clearing up, invigorated like never before. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered Shi Feng's ears. System, you have activated the Silver Legacy Room. This room can be used only 12 times a month, and only one player may enter each time. Players will be able to experience what their current mana body feels like at 100% potential for 5 minutes. Once the session ends, players will not be allowed re-entry into the Legacy Room for 1 natural month. The Silver Mark also provides such a benefit? Shi Feng gazed at the token in his hand in astonishment. The difference between 3 minutes and 5 minutes might not be very long, but being able to experience the sensation of a fully unlocked mana body for even a second longer meant that players could better familiarize themselves with that feeling. Meanwhile, the Silver Mark had nearly doubled the duration that players could carry inside the Legacy Room. At this moment, Shi Feng more or less understood why the various superpowers had desperately invested into a select few peak experts and continuously had them challenge the legacy gate of the fortresses they controlled. They hadn't done so just to unlock more of their fortresses' functions but to better develop their guild experts. After all, guild experts were the capital of guilds. Everything else was secondary. Alright, which one of you will enter first? Shi Feng asked as he turned around to look at Aqua Rose and the others. Upon hearing Shi Feng's question, Aqua Rose and the others exchanged glances, unsure whether they should enter the Legacy Room or not. Shi Feng had already told them that this opportunity was available to them only once a month. If they did not grab a hold of it properly, they would have to wait another month to experience what fully unlocking their mana bodies felt like. At that time, everything would be too late already. I'll go first then, Fire Dance said after giving the matter some thought. Alright. Just walk straight into the room. Once you're inside, focus all your attention on your mana body and try your best to adapt to the sensations you feel, Shi Feng advised as he pointed into the Legacy Room, which was the size of half a basketball court. The situation inside the Legacy Room was the complete opposite of the situation inside the Legacy Gate. Instead of a sparse mana environment, the Legacy Room's environment abounded with mana. While standing inside such a room, players would find it practically impossible to perceive the flow of mana inside their own bodies clearly. They could only rely on their intuition to progress. I understand. Fire Dance nodded before walking into the room. Meanwhile, after Fire Dance entered the Legacy Room, the crystalline door sealed itself once more. Everyone's heartbeat started accelerating at the sight. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You no need to be anxious. Even if you fail to fully unlock your mana body this time, you can still continue trying in the outside world. It is only a matter of time before you unlock your mana body. Just treat this as an opportunity to experience it ahead of time, Shi Feng said, smiling when he saw how nervous everyone was. The opportunity the Legacy Room provided was indeed very important. However, even if one failed to fully unlock their mana body after entering the Legacy Room, it did not mean that they wouldn't be able to unlock their mana body in the future. They merely had to pay a higher price to do so. At this moment, Aqua Rose suddenly received a message. After reading it, she turned to Shi Feng and said, Guild Leader McCaffrey sent me another message. He says something big has happened and he needs you to pay him a visit now. Is it so urgent? Shi Feng was a little confused as to why McCaffrey kept trying to contact him. Alright, it's best if I go first. The Legacy Room is already activated. Enter it one by one. After leaving these instructions, Shi Feng immediately exited the Fortress Lord's mansion and made his way toward Divine Tribe's temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2469, Storm Brewing Starlight Fortress, Divine Tribe's temporary residence. After undergoing the Silver Lion Legion's cleansing, the fortress that was originally ruled by monsters was now devoid of monsters. Instead, players now crowded it. Moreover, these players were all very high level and very well equipped. They were undoubtedly Divine Tribe's experts. At this moment, these expert players were agog as they walked through the streets of the Starlight Fortress, which had already become the focus of many powers and players. As a fortress located in Star Valley, a level 100+ forbidden land, the Starlight Fortress's functions were simply immense. Not only could it allow players to save up on plenty of travel time, but it could also serve as a player's haven for rest and recovery. At the same time, it would become a trade hub in Star Valley. After all, Star Valley was massive. Moreover, players had nowhere to rest in the surrounding maps. Besides, Star Valley was rich in resources, a place where players could obtain leveling resources. Hence, as the only trade hub available in Star Valley, the resources the Starlight Fortress could acquire in the future would be immeasurable. As a fortress that had existed since ancient times, the Starlight Fortress's ambient mana was incredibly dense. None of the present fortresses found in the outside world had anything similar. On the western continent, which suffered from a dearth of mana, the Starlight Fortress was a rare training ground. Shi Feng could sympathize with the excitement Divine Tribe's members felt. After players captured an ancient fortress, not only could they concentrate a large amount of mana inside the fortress, but this mana would also be very gentle. Even players with subpar control over mana would have their control artificially improved by a significant margin while inside the fortress. Although this improvement was only temporary, if players could immerse themselves in such an environment long-term, they could use this experience to achieve a permanent improvement. To the Western Continent's players who prioritized control over mana before control over their physical bodies, the Starlight Fortress was an absolute gem of a training ground. Guild leader Black Flame, the vice commander and the others are all waiting inside the reception room. Please follow me. Shortly after Shi Feng arrived before the entrance of Divine Tribe's residence, a middle-aged man who was a level 106 Guardian Knight approached him. This middle-aged man gave off a very kind and humble feeling. However, the aura he radiated was not the slightest bit weaker than that of Grand Lords of the same level. In terms of strength, he was most likely stronger than even the Silver Lion Legion's Crimson Witch. "I'll have to trouble you then," Shi Feng replied. Inwardly, he sighed ruefully as he considered this humble, middle-aged man. In the current Zero Wing, Yan Tianxing and Shi Feng himself were the only ones that had reached the Domain Realm. However, just one day after he captured the Starlight Fortress, Divine Tribe revealed another Domain Realm expert to him. Shi Feng could not help but admit that superpowers were indeed amazing. It would most likely be a long time before Zero Wing could catch up to them. After hearing Shi Feng's reply, the middle-aged man led Shi Feng into Divine Tribe's residence. Upon entering the residence's guild hall, Shi Feng received something of a fright. At this moment, the residence's guild hall had been fully renovated. Not only did the interior of the building look splendid, but the floors of the building were even tiled using mana Oregon. Not even the guild hall in Zero Wing's main headquarters could compete with this guild hall in terms of extravagance. Mana ore was a rare type of ore. Although it was not as valuable as magic crystals, it contained a significant amount of mana. Items made with mana ore would exude a small amount of mana and increase the density of the mana in their vicinity by a certain degree. However, as the cost generally wasn't worth the potential returns, very few superpowers would be willing to use mana ore as flooring. Meanwhile, this was only a temporary residence for Divine Tribe, yet the guild had actually used mana ore as flooring. This was already beyond extravagance and entered the realm of reckless waste. However, from this, one could also see how much importance Divine Tribe placed on this temporary residence. After all, if the temporary residence changed owners, the mana ore used here could not be taken away. If Zero Wing suddenly decided to change partners, Divine Tribe's actions would be akin to gifting its mana ore to another power. However, despite knowing this, Divine Tribe had still done so. A short moment later, under the middle-aged man's lead, Shi Feng arrived at the top-floor reception room. Currently, 3 people were seated inside the reception room. McCaffrey and Crimson Witch, whom Shi Feng was familiar with, and a beautiful female berserker with blonde hair and crimson eyes. This female berserker wore silvery gray light armor and carried a runic greatsword that radiated mana. Although this female berserker was only sitting quietly inside the room, it was as if she had stolen all the color from her surroundings. Aside from herself, everything else inside the room looked monotone in color. The Magic Eye Goddess? Why is she here? Shi Feng was stunned when he saw this female berserker. This was because he was even more familiar with this woman than with McCaffrey and Crimson Witch. She was one of the few Tier 6 God-ranked experts in his previous life, the wielder of Eternal Sin, a legendary weapon. In the past, she had ranked high even among Tier 6 experts. She had also managed to develop the guild. She established herself into a super first-rate guild, becoming a legend in God's domain. Meanwhile, because of the peak hidden class, Magic Eye Hunter, she obtained, she was also nicknamed the Magic Eye Goddess. Currently, however, this Magic Eye Goddess was wearing Divine Tribe's guild emblem. This situation was completely different from what Shi Feng knew. Guild leader Black Flame, are you two perhaps acquainted with each other? McCaffrey asked curiously when he noticed the change in Shi Feng's expression. After calming himself, Shi Feng shook his head and explained, "No, we're not acquainted. She just looks very similar to someone I know." At Shi Feng's reply, McCaffrey no longer paid much attention to the matter, saying, "In that case, let me introduce you. This person here is Phythalia, the commander of Divine Tribe's Divine Hymn Legion. She will also be in charge of the Divine Tribe forces that will be garrisoned in the Starlight Fortress from now on." "Greetings. I am Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame." Shi Feng introduced himself as he looked at Phythalia. "Greetings as well, guild leader Black Flame. I had heard plenty about you from Crimson even before I came here. However, after seeing you in person, it seems you're even stronger than what I heard. You are actually unaffected within my illusory domain. It seems you have already unlocked your mana body to a considerable extent," Phythalia said, a flash of surprise appearing in her eyes as she looked at Shi Feng. After obtaining her Magic Eye Hunter hidden class, she had gained a naturally occurring domain that grew stronger the higher her tier became. After she reached tier 3, even Crimson Witch, who possessed a peak gold mana body, was not immune to the effects of her illusory domain. Within her illusory domain, not only would players' control of their own body's mana decline significantly, but players would also lose the ability to control the mana around them. At this point, only experts that had unlocked their mana bodies by a certain extent were capable of resisting the effects of her illusory domain. "You have started unlocking your mana body already?" Crimson Witch blurted out when she heard Phythalia's words. She had been researching how she could unlock her mana body's potential all this time. However, even now, she still hadn't found any concrete information. She had never imagined that Shi Feng had actually unlocked a portion of his mana body's potential already. "It's just a portion. I'm still far from fully unlocking it," Shi Feng admitted truthfully. "So, that's the case. No wonder your attacks were so powerful before." Realization dawned upon Crimson Witch when she heard Shi Feng's reply. Previously, she had felt that the skills and spells Shi Feng had used were ridiculously powerful. They looked nothing like Tier 3 skills and spells used by the current Tier 3 players. In hindsight, this was most likely due to Shi Feng having unlocked a portion of his mana body's strength already, hence his skills and spells were a lot more powerful than the average Tier 3 players. Suddenly she felt that she had a chance to catch up with Shi Feng. Although she hadn't started unlocking her mana body yet, she did have a few leads. She was confident she could unlock a portion of her mana body's strength in a few more days. At that time she would no longer lose to Shi Feng so easily. "May I know why you asked me to come here?" Shi Feng asked, not bothering with additional explanations on his mana body. "It's an urgent matter," Phythalia replied, her expression suddenly turning serious. "Before I arrived at the Starlight Fortress, I received word that plenty of superpowers are making their way to the Starlight Fortress. Even Netherworld Empire, one of the 5 great super guilds, is interested. In fact, Netherworld Empire has dispatched one of its trump card legions. We might be able to deal with the other superpowers, but Netherworld Empire is a different story. Although Netherworld Empire's trump card legion has very few members, those players can no longer be referred to as humans. They are complete and utter monsters. Setting aside the high likelihood that they are coming to contest for the fortress's ruling rights, if they decide to make a fuss inside the fortress, no one will be able to control them. Even if we continue holding on to the fortress's ruling rights, we will only be rulers in name. Normal operations would be impossible. Hence, I asked you to visit in hopes you can sell a portion of the fortress's shares, Guild Leader Black Flame. Divine Tribe will help Zero Wing as a middleman in this matter. If we include the Crimson Dragon flying ship you have in the Starlight Fortress's defenses, I believe Netherworld Empire will not go too far." In regard to Phythalia's suggestion, neither McCaffrey nor Crimson Witch found anything wrong with it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU on the Western Continent, there was nobody that did not know how frightening Netherworld Empire was. Could be said to be a gathering of lunatics. This great super guild never operated according to social norms or logic. In fact, it had already annihilated one superpower in God's domain. If Zero Wing and Divine Tribe were to clash with Netherworld Empire, even if they managed to protect the fortress itself still wouldn't be able to establish itself on the Western Continent. Their only way out now was to split a portion of the fortress's profits. After all, the Starlight Fortress involved too many things. Zero Wing and Divine Tribe couldn't stop all of the Western Continent's superpowers. However, it would be a different story if they had Netherworld Empire's assistance. "I understand Divine Tribe's predicament," Shi Feng said, nodding. Smiling, he continued, "As for the Starlight Fortress's matters, leave them to Zero Wing. If Netherworld Empire wishes to cause a ruckus, it is free to try. If it is capable of doing so, I wouldn't mind gifting the fortress to it. If there are no other matters, I'll take my leave first. After saying so, Shi Feng turned around and left the reception room, his actions stunning Thalia, McCaffrey, and Crimson Witch. For a time, silence fell over the entire reception room. Chapter 2470, Fortress Unlocked. Quite some time had passed after Shi Feng left the reception room before Thalia and the others managed to snap out of their daze. Has guild leader Black Flame always been such an impulsive person? Thalia could not help but ask as she turned to look at McCaffrey and Crimson Witch. Her mind couldn't keep up with Shi Feng's pace at all. When fighting over interests, superpowers rarely started with a declaration of war. They would generally choose to settle things with discussions. Only if negotiations broke down would they take action. After all, a war between two superpowers was no trivial matter. Regardless of the outcome, both sides would end up suffering significant, and even irreparable losses. Meanwhile, she had merely proposed to negotiate with Netherworld Empire and asked Shi Feng to prepare to make some minor concessions. Yet Shi Feng had flat-out rejected her proposal and decided to clash with the Great Super Guild to the very end. This simply wasn't a decision a guild leader would make. Only a fool would do so. Of course, she also found Shi Feng's decision understandable. Zero Wing had gone to great lengths to capture the Starlight Fortress. However, just as it was about to start harvesting its profits, a bunch of people suddenly appeared to claim a share of these profits. Any normal person would get enraged by this matter. However, such a situation frequently occurred in both the real world and the virtual world. In a situation where one was weaker than the other party, opting for a frontal clash was an extremely unwise decision. This was especially true now that more than a dozen superpowers were targeting the Starlight Fortress. So long as one of these superpowers took the lead, they would attack the Starlight Fortress without hesitation. At that time, even if these superpowers failed to capture the Starlight Fortress, they would still cripple its operation. Unlike other fortresses, the Starlight Fortress did not have any NPC soldiers to assist in its management. Players had to rely entirely on themselves. Moreover, the ruling power would have only partial authority over the fortress and was incapable of prohibiting entry to certain players by manipulating the fortress magic array. If the ruling power wished to prevent entry to certain players, it would have to rely on its own players to do so. This was also the case when it came to settling fights that occurred within the fortress. Meanwhile, over a dozen superpowers were targeting the Starlight Fortress, including Netherworld Empire. So long as these superpowers dispatched experts to cause a ruckus inside the Starlight Fortress, stopping them would be impossible with the manpower and strength Zero Wing and Divine Tribe possessed. In fact, Zero Wing and Divine Tribe wouldn't even be able to stop the various superpowers from entering the Starlight Fortress. If this situation persisted, who would dare visit the Starlight Fortress? Guild leader Black Flame is indeed a very straightforward person. However, even I did not expect him to be so resolute in his stance that he won't even negotiate, McCaffrey said. Likewise, Shi Feng's decisive response exceeded his expectations. Commander Thalia, what should we do next? There is no room for discussions on Zero Wing's side. Are we really going to clash with the various superpowers? Crimson Witch asked worriedly. After partnering with Zero Wing, Divine Tribe had invested a huge amount of resources into developing its temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Divine Tribe had even drafted a series of plans around the Starlight Fortress and invested a large portion of the guild's resources into these plans. If the Starlight Fortress really became a no-man's land, then Divine Tribe's investments would come to naught. I am familiar with Hell Rush, the commander of Netherworld Empire's trump card Legion. Since he is personally leading the Legion over, I will try to negotiate with him, Thalia said, chuckling when she saw the worried expression on Crimson Witch's face. Moreover, we still haven't reached that point yet. Once the various superpowers and Netherworld Empire's members arrive, guild leader Black Flame might realize how unwise his decision is. At that time we might be able to turn things around. She had seen plenty of people like Shi Feng before. After all experts were very arrogant. Not to mention, Zero Wing had managed to capture the Starlight Fortress, something none of the Western continent's superpowers had managed. It was only natural for him to have confidence in his guild's strength and not be afraid to fight the various superpowers. However, once the various superpowers experts gathered and Shi Feng personally experienced the strength of these superpowers, it wouldn't be strange if he changed his mind. After all, he had just arrived on the Western continent recently and did not understand just how powerful the superpowers here were. He also wasn't aware of just how formidable Netherworld Empire was. While Thalia and the others were discussing how to deal with the various superpowers, Shi Feng arrived at the main office on the Fortress Lord's Mansion's third floor to assume control over the entire Starlight Fortress. Previously, although he had unlocked the magic array sealing the Fortress Lord's Mansion and even allowed Fire Dance and the others to enter the mansion's legacy room, he still hadn't gained control over the Starlight Fortress. This was because an ancient fortress's Fortress Lord's token did not automatically confer the ruling rights to the fortress on its holder. Players still needed to go through a simple takeover procedure. When Shi Feng opened the doors to the main office, he was greeted by the sight of an elderly man in butler attire standing inside the old and obsolete office. Although this elderly man was only a phantom and radiated no aura, he was a near-invincible existence while inside this Fortress Lord's mansion. At the same time, he was the true ruler of the entire Starlight Fortress. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, I am Osset, the Starlight Fortress's administrator. How may I be of service? Osset asked respectfully when he saw Shi Feng enter. I wish to receive control over the Starlight Fortress, Shi Feng said, declaring his intentions. Ancient fortresses were different from other fortresses. All authority over the fortress was vested in the administrator. Hence, ancient fortresses would always remain in a semi-controlled state. If players holding the Fortress Lord's token wished to gain any control over the ancient fortress they captured, they had to get it from the fortress's administrator. Meanwhile, an administrator would pass on their authority only if players possessed the Fortress Lord's mark obtained from the fortress's legacy gate. Otherwise, they would only be a fake Fortress Lord who could be replaced at any given time. Before players gained authority from the fortress administrator, the entire fortress would acknowledge only the Fortress Lord's token and not its holder. Moreover, the Fortress Lord's token offered no protection to players. And worse, players had to keep the Fortress Lord's token at all times. If the token was brought out of the fortress for too long, it would be automatically teleported back to the fortress and appear in a random location inside. Only by obtaining a Fortress Lord's mark and, subsequently, authority from the fortress administrator would players be considered the partial ruler of an ancient fortress. Players could then store their Fortress Lord's token in the core room of the Fortress Lord's mansion, utilizing the mansion's defensive magic array to protect it. Unless someone else attacked the Fortress Lord's mansion and obtained the token from the core room, players would no longer have to worry about losing control over their fortress. Moreover, after obtaining the authority to rule an ancient fortress, players could also activate some of the fortress's functions. Among them, the most important would be the fortress prison. This was an incredible function that none of the newly constructed fortresses possessed. This function was incredible because it allowed the ruler of the fortress to imprison players. So long as players were captured, they would suffer a fate even worse than death. Unless players had fulfilled their sentence or someone outside destroyed the prison itself, imprisoned players couldn't come out of the fortress prison. It wouldn't matter even if the imprisoned players killed themselves, they would respawn right back in their cell. Getting imprisoned was a brutal penalty for players. After all, in God's domain, time was money, especially for frontline players. Being jailed and prevented from doing anything for several days would cause them to fall behind significantly. Meanwhile, the fortress prison of a small fortress like the Starlight Fortress could imprison players for a maximum of 8 days. 8 days. If an expert player suddenly lost 8 days' worth of time, they would most likely lose the will to continue living. This was why Shi Feng dared to oppose the various superpowers. So what if the various superpowers possessed a lot of experts? If they dared make a ruckus in the fortress, he would capture and imprison them all. He was eager to see just how many Tier 3 experts the various superpowers had for him to imprison for 8 days. As for destroying the fortress prison and freeing the imprisoned players, the various superpowers would be dreaming if they thought they could accomplish this feat. The fortress prison possessed an incredibly powerful defensive magic array. Once it was activated, even Tier 5 existences shouldn't think of breaking into the fortress prison. In fact, breaking into the Fortress Lord's mansion would be even easier than breaking into the fortress prison. Very well. Osset summoned a fourfold magic array beneath Shi Feng's feet. He then continued, after inspection, it seems you possess 1 bronze mark and 1 silver mark. You have automatically gained the Silver Fortress authority. You may activate 1 bronze fortress privilege and 1 silver fortress privilege. Do you wish to choose which privileges to activate now? Yes, Shi Feng said, nodding. Here is a list of all the bronze and silver privileges available. You may choose one from each category, Osset said, waving his hand. Immediately, a translucent screen appeared before Shi Feng. In the next moment, 2 columns of choices appeared on the screen. The first column was a list of the available bronze privileges. There was a total of 3 options: Fortress Prison, Fortress Restaurant and Fortress Hotel. The second column listed the available silver privileges. Similarly, there were 3 options available: Manification Tower, Object Creation Tower and Summoning Tower. So these are the Starlight Fortress's silver privileges? Surprise flashed in Shi Feng's eyes as he looked at the 3 entries under the silver privileges column. He had seen many silver fortress privileges before. However, the Starlight Fortress's silver privileges could definitely rival those of large fortresses. The Manification Tower was something that could further increase the density of the fortress's ambient mana. Although the Starlight Fortress's mana density was already very high, if the effects of the Manification Tower were included, then its mana density would most likely surpass even Zero-Wing cities. The Object Creation Tower was a sacred training ground for lifestyle players because it housed advanced meditation rooms and intermediate research rooms. Even a player with subpar talent would have a high chance of becoming a master lifestyle player if they could constantly work inside the Object Creation Tower. The Summoning Tower was something Shi Feng had seen only once before inside a medium fortress. However, the Summoning Tower was categorized as a gold privilege back then. As its name suggested, the Summoning Tower had only one function: the summoning of creatures. Once provided with the appropriate medium, the Summoning Tower could summon creatures of a similar race to act as the fortress's guardian. The stronger the medium, the stronger the summoned creature would be. Only one creature could be summoned in a month, and only one creature could be maintained in existence at a time. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This ability might not seem like much, but it was incredibly powerful in reality. This was because there were no restrictions on the creature that could be summoned. In other words, if players managed to get their hands on the remains of a Tier 6 god, they could summon a Tier 6 god to defend their fortress. A Tier 6 god. This was an existence that even Tier 6 god rank players had to avoid crossing. If the Starlight Fortress had a Tier 6 god defending it, let alone attacking the fortress, nobody would dare make a scene in the entire map because the entire map the fortress sat on lay within the Fortress Guardian's range of activity. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, please make your decision, Osset reminded Shi Feng after seeing the latter remaining quiet for a long time. Chapter 2471, Summoning Tower Activated Osset's reminder snapped Shi Feng out of his daze. I choose the Fortress Prison and Summoning Tower. Shi Feng immediately answered. Of the bronze privileges available, the Fortress Prison was mandatory in Shi Feng's mind. Without this function, he couldn't deter his enemies from causing trouble within the fortress. As for the silver privileges, the Manification Tower and Object Creation Tower would increase the ancient fortress's value and make it more popular among players. However, the Starlight Fortress was the only captured fortress in Star Valley, and as such, had no competition. Any player that wanted to develop in Star Valley would have no choice but to visit the Starlight Fortress, which made both towers unnecessary. The Summoning Tower, on the other hand, was a different story. Of the 3 silver privileges, only the Summoning Tower would grant Zero-Wing more control over the Starlight Fortress, which is what the guild needed more than anything right now. Zero-Wing only had 10 members on the Western continent, and if it weren't for Divine Tribe's help, it wouldn't have been able to manage the fortress, even if it had managed to capture it. If the Summoning Tower were added into the equation, however, that wouldn't be the case. As long as Zero-Wing summoned a sufficiently formidable creature, it'd be able to hold the fortress even with almost no members. The summoned creature would follow the basic behavioral conditions players set. Players could instruct the summoned creature to defend the Fortress Lord's mansion, for example, or prevent certain people from entering the fortress. Players could also direct the creature to deal with any players that started fights within as well. Combined with the Fortress Prison, no player would dare cause a scene in this fortress. Of course, this would only be the case if the summoned creature was strong enough. If the summoned creature couldn't kill or suppress players quickly enough, the Summoning Tower would be little more than decoration. Unlike the Manification Tower and Object Creation Tower that provided clear benefits, the Summoning Tower would only be as useful as the summoned creature. Moreover, nurturing a summoned creature would require a lot of resources. At first, players would summon the creature at their level. To increase the creature's level, players would have to invest resources. The amount of resources required would depend on the summoned creature's standards. The more powerful the creature was, the more resources it would require to level up. Based on the rumors Shi Feng had heard, the daily cost of maintaining a Tier 5 demonic creature was already on par with an ordinary first-rate guild's total daily net profits. Without sufficient resources, players simply couldn't support the Summoning Tower's use. Shi Feng wasn't concerned with that issue right now, however. The Starlight Fortress was the only fortress under player control throughout Star Valley at the moment, and it was also very close to the map's God Mode regional dungeon. If Shi Feng could establish his rule over the regional dungeon, he'd easily earn more daily income from the fortress alone to surpass first-rate guilds' total daily income. He could make a fortune just by collecting entrance fees. Ancient fortresses were not managed by NPCs, which meant that players didn't have to split the entrance fees with the system. Players would receive 100% of the collected entrance fees. Moreover, a small fortress could charge a maximum of 20 silver per person. This was one of the reasons that ancient fortresses had been so popular among the various superpowers in the past. Once Shi Feng had made his decision, Osset began to chant an incantation. The ghostly NPC then drew a mysterious rune and imprinted it on the Fortress Lord's token in Shi Feng's hand. Suddenly, a translucent screen appeared above the token, listing the 6 privileges Shi Feng had observed earlier. 2 privileges text gave off a dull glow: the Fortress Prison and the Summoning Tower. Starlight Fortress Prison status: unlocked activation cost, 30,000 magic crystals daily operating cost, 3,000 magic crystals. Do you wish to activate the Starlight Fortress Prison? Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower status: unlocked activation cost, 50,000 magic crystals daily operating cost, 5,000 magic crystals. Do you wish to activate the Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower? Seeing the prompts, Shi Feng chose to activate the Summoning Tower first, setting aside the Fortress Prison for the moment. The Starlight Fortress was still sealed, and outsiders weren't allowed to enter. Shi Feng didn't need to hurry to activate the Fortress Prison. Magic crystals didn't grow on trees after all, and if he activated the prison 2 days before the fortress opened to the public, he'd only waste 6,000 magic crystals. However, the sooner he activated the Summoning Tower, the better. Summoning creatures took time, and the more powerful the target creature was, the more time it would require to summon. In addition, nurturing the summoned creature required time. Shi Feng, who lacked time, wanted nothing more than to summon a creature immediately. If he were lucky, he might be able to level the creature up within the next 2 days. Monsters weren't like NPCs and players. As they leveled up, their basic attributes and combat power would rise to the peak of their level. In comparison, players and NPCs didn't receive such a huge strength boost upon leveling up. They would still need to upgrade weapons and equipment. Following which, Shi Feng sacrificed 100,000 magic crystals to the Fortress Lord's token, half of which would activate the Summoning Tower, while the remaining half would maintain its operation for 10 days. With the Summoning Tower's activation, a new rune rose from the token and imprinted itself on Shi Feng's right palm. System: you have successfully activated the Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower. The Summoning Tower's large-scale teleportation array is now active. You may utilize the Summoning Rune to teleport to the Summoning Tower at any time. The Summoning Rune has a cooldown of 1 natural day. The Summoning Tower had such an ability? A little surprised, Shi Feng glanced down at the Summoning Rune on his palm. There was nothing amazing about God's Domain's teleportation arrays. Every NPC city had them. Players could even set them up in guild residences. However, these were all small or medium-scale teleportation arrays. Large-scale teleportation arrays were considered lost technology. Unlike the small and medium-scale teleportation arrays, large-scale teleportation arrays allowed players to teleport between the 2 main continents. The array in the Summoning Tower was a large-scale teleportation array, which meant that Shi Feng would be able to travel to the Starlight Fortress at any time, even from the eastern continent. Moreover, the Summoning Rune only had a 1-day cooldown, making it an incredibly convenient tool. Traveling between the main continents was an ordeal since ancient teleportation arrays that allowed players to travel between them had fixed teleportation times. If players missed the designated time, they'd have to wait until the next scheduled teleportation. This was particularly challenging for guilds that wanted to mingle on both continents. Prices for items constantly fluctuated, and if players couldn't offload their stock at the right time, doing so would become complicated. Not only would this Summoning Rune allow travel to the west far easier, but he could also bring whatever items the west needed at any given time. He'd be able to earn far more money from reselling the east's items than without it. After a brief moment of elation, Shi Feng activated the Summoning Rune and teleported to the Summoning Tower. The Summoning Tower was located in the Starlight Fortress's south end. The stone tower was the tallest building in the fortress, standing 200 meters tall. From the top of the tower, one could oversee everything within the fortress. As the teleportation array on the Summoning Tower's roof lit up, Shi Feng appeared in the tower. To Shi Feng's surprise, Osset waited for him on the summoning tower's roof, but unlike earlier, his body seemed more tangible. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, the summoning tower is now active. If you wish to summon a Fortress Guardian, I must inform you of two things. This array requires a medium of sufficient standards to summon a Guardian. It cannot summon creatures without input. The more powerful the medium is, the stronger the summoned creature will be. Each summoning also has a 1-month cooldown. I hope you will use this summoning tower properly, Osset informed Shi Feng before transforming into mist and disappearing. Of course, Shi Feng had already known these factors. This information was precisely the reason he had chosen the summoning tower. This should be the place. After approaching the summoning altar on the roof, Shi Feng pulled a claw the size of an adult human from his bag, placing it on the altar. This claw had once belonged to the ice dragon, Heathweight, and it was one of the only 2 legendary materials Shi Feng had on him. Initially, Shi Feng had wanted to use the ice dragon's claw once he had obtained an epic weapon design, but summoning an ice dragon wasn't a bad second choice. His summoned creature would protect the Starlight Fortress, and an ordinary monster simply wouldn't be up to the task. Although he could summon the Starlight Behemoth with the Behemoth Starlight Scales, that monster wasn't nearly as formidable as an ice dragon. As soon as Shi Feng rested the claw on the altar, he heard the sound of a system notification. System, the summoning altar has discovered the ice dragon's claw. Do you wish to analyze this medium? Begin. Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng made his decision. Not all mediums would work. If the selected medium didn't have enough energy, the summoning wouldn't happen. He already felt the painful sting of losing the ice dragon's claw. He didn't want to sacrifice 2 of them. Doing so would mean throwing away 2 epic weapons. As the altar began its analysis, dark purple smoke emerged from the summoning altar to envelop the gigantic claw. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As the seconds passed, Shi Feng grew more nervous. If one ice dragon's claw weren't enough to summon an ice dragon, he'd have to summon the Starlight Behemoth with the Starlight Scales instead. The scales were inferior legendary materials and he had a total of 5. They would certainly be more than enough to summon a Starlight Behemoth. While Shi Feng considered using the Starlight Scales as a replacement, he heard another system notification. System, medium's energy completion rate is at 89% and has met summoning requirements. Do you wish to summon the Guardian? Summon. Chapter 2472, Silver Divine Dragon. Once Shi Feng agreed to begin the summoning, the purple smoke around the ice dragon's claw acted like a hungry wolf that had just found food. In no time, it devoured the stone-like claw. After devouring the claw, the intensity of the smoke's aura skyrocketed like a beast that had just woken from a long sleep. The frightening aura was so powerful that Shi Feng struggled to move. The aura was almost even stronger than that of a Tier 5 NPC. If a Tier 2 player stood in his place, they might have collapsed under the mighty pressure. As the purple smoke's aura grew stronger, the pressure Shi Feng felt increased as well. Just as he was about to fall to his knees, the purple smoke flowed into the summoning altar's ancient magic array. Boom. The instant the purple smoke merged with the magic array, space exploded, forming countless tears around the array. It was as if the surrounding space couldn't endure the power contained within the magic array. After several seconds, space in the center of the altar began to crumble, revealing a dark void. The void grew and in the blink of an eye, it had swallowed nearly half of the altar. Just before the void reached Shi Feng, the magic array engraved on the summoning altar flashed with a silver light that instantly suppressed the void. It stopped the growing darkness at the edge of the altar, preventing its further expansion. However, due to the void's presence, the mana density around Shi Feng steadily decreased. A void land. Shi Feng stared at the black hole before him, astonished. What is going on? The summoning tower used a sacrificial medium to open a portal to an otherworld, from which players could guide their target creature. Naturally, the magic array would use stronger mediums to open stronger otherworlds. Yet, after devouring the ice dragon's claw, the summoning altar had opened a portal to a void land. A void land was a land of death, in which very few creatures in God's domain could survive. Void lands didn't even contain a trace of energy, much less mana. As Shi Feng stared, confused, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, you have triggered the epic quest, Void Cage. Quest content. Release the silver divine dragon that is imprisoned deep in the void land. Rewards unknown. There is no penalty for failing this quest. Do you wish to accept this quest? A silver divine dragon? Shi Feng's astonishment only grew when he heard the notification. He had only used an ice dragon's claw as a medium. He had never expected it to trigger a portal to a silver divine dragon's location. Dragons were the apex race in God's domain. Any random adult dragon had tier 5 strength, and they were known as invincible among beings of the same tier. Not even human heroes, individuals who had received God's blessings, were a match for dragons of the same tier. However, not all dragons were equal. Divine dragons were dragons with the primeval dragon bloodline. Rather, they had a significant fraction of the primal dragon's bloodline. Normal dragons only had negligible traces of the primal dragon's bloodline. The difference between a divine dragon and an ordinary dragon's strength was on par with the difference between an archaic species and an ordinary monster. The two were on completely different levels. At most, ordinary dragons were invincible among creatures of the same tier. Divine dragons, however, could transcend tiers. Everyone in God's domain showed the proper respect before divine dragons. No one wanted to offend one. Shi Feng doubted that even the jealous witch, who was as devastating as a natural disaster, was a match for a tier 5 divine dragon. With almost no hesitation, Shi Feng accepted the epic quest. Although there were no penalties for failing or refusing the epic quest, Shi Feng would have to abandon this summoning attempt by refusing it. If he did, he'd have to wait another month before he could attempt to summon another guardian, and he couldn't afford to do that. Moreover, encountering another opportunity to summon a divine dragon would likely be impossible, and if he could complete the quest, he'd hit the jackpot. Summoning a tier 6 god in God's domain was almost impossible. Not a single super guild in Shi Feng's previous life had ever managed to acquire a corpse or body part of such a being. Needless to say, it was utterly out of Zero Wing's reach. Without a tier 6 god, a tier 5 divine dragon was the strongest possible guardian he could summon. After Shi Feng accepted the quest, the summoning altar formed a magic array beneath his feet, and a silver barrier took shape around him. Shi Feng could immediately feel the pressure bearing down on him subside. With this barrier to protect him, Shi Feng felt that surviving in the Void Land shouldn't pose much of an issue. Does it want me to enter the portal? Once the silver barrier was complete, Shi Feng noticed a new buff in his status window. This buff would last 3 natural days. A Void Land was an absolute forbidden land. Aside from gods and void souls, creatures born in void lands, surviving in a void land was nearly unheard of. Even with this magic barrier, he'd be lucky to exhibit 30% of his usual combat power. Void lands contain no mana, and Shi Feng hadn't fully unlocked his mana body yet. If he encountered a void soul in his state, he'd die. The weakest void soul was still on par with a tier 4 mythic monster, while stronger void souls could rival adult dragon strength. Knowing all of this, Shi Feng still gritted his teeth and entered the portal to the void land, taking the risk. Although void souls were incredibly powerful, there typically weren't many of them. The chance that he'd run across one in a massive void land was quite low. On the off chance that he did encounter a void soul, he could summon a tier 4 hero with the hero's tome. Heroes were protected by the gods, and thus their combat power would remain unaffected within a void land. With a tier 4 hero by his side, he shouldn't have any problems as long as he wasn't spotted by any tier 5 void souls. Shi Feng then entered the dark space and the scene around him changed. Once the world around him settled, he found himself on a gigantic, floating island. The entire island was desolate, and hovering in the center of the lifeless plot of earth was a colossal magic cage. The cage was several hundred meters tall, wide, and long and covered in all sorts of divine runes, which radiated an ancient, eternal aura. Inside the cage slept a silver infant dragon. Even trapped, the infant dragon's aura was unsuppressed, and as it washed over Shi Feng, he struggled to breathe. What a powerful life rating. It's no wonder why even the various superpowers god-ranked experts in the past were no match for tier 5 divine dragons in a one-on-one fight. Shi Feng was dumbfounded as he gazed at the infant dragon hovering in the island's center. He had seen plenty of true dragons in his time, but he had never seen a divine dragon before. The ice dragon he had fought in the Cold Spring Canyon was nothing compared to this infant dragon. The differences between them were like that between an ordinary stone and a diamond. Working to contain his excitement, Shi Feng began to look for ways to open the magic cage. Most players hadn't seen a magic cage at this stage of the game and wouldn't know how to open one, but Shi Feng wasn't most players. Magic cages had typically been used during ancient times to imprison criminals while they waited for punishment. The power of time would steadily wear down the prisoner's strength. This was why God's domain had so many epic quests that required players to slay these criminals, finally meting out justice. To end these criminals' long, miserable lives, players would have to release the seal on the prisoner's magic cage. Shi Feng had never opened a magic cage before, but based on what he had learned from others, one first had to locate the core magic arrays, which were located in the outside world. Players could then destroy or decode the arrays to unlock the magic cage. Shi Feng spent the next dozen or so hours searching, during which he found a total of 7 magic arrays around the desolate island. Every one of the arrays was incredibly complex, and that wasn't a result of the level of design. Rather, their complexity was a result of the frightening number of elements to each array. Even as a master magician, Shi Feng felt a headache brew as he examined the magic arrays. Whoever designed these magic arrays is vicious. Did they have any intention of letting the divine dragon free? Every one of these magic arrays uses 7 elements. Without having mastered all 7, no one could open this magic cage. Shi Feng was flabbergasted after examining the core magic arrays. Magic arrays used mana as their foundations, and normally, a master magic array would, at most, rely on the 4 major elements' power. Ordinary people couldn't control the remaining 3 supreme elements: illusion, space, and time. Not even the elven race, beloved by the elements, could accomplish the feat to decode the core magic arrays. Players would need to have mastered all 7 elements. Without that master, they simply wouldn't have the power to decode them. However, players normally only encountered the 3 supreme elements after reaching Tier 5, and that would only be a brush of contact. Decoding these magic arrays is impossible. It seems destroying them is my only choice. Giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng realized that destruction was his only option. The core magic arrays might look very powerful, but they didn't have any significant defensive mechanisms. As long as he could deal more damage than the arrays could tolerate, he should be able to destroy the magic arrays. Shi Feng then retrieved the Crimson Dragon flying ship and attacked one of the arrays with the ship's magic elven cannon. Boom! The beam struck the core magic array, and the entire island shook with the impact. As the dust settled, Shi Feng noticed that the array's glow had dimmed slightly. Yes, it's working. Shi Feng's excitement spiked when he saw the results of his attack. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The blast hadn't exceeded the magic array's tolerance, but it had exhausted a significant fraction of the array's energy reserves. If he could deplete the magic array's energy to a certain level, the array wouldn't be able to endure the magic elven cannon's attacks and crumble. For a time, Shi Feng bombarded the core magic arrays, firing the moment the magic elven cannon's cooldown came to an end. He didn't mind the magic crystals he had to spend to do it. He still had plenty on him. Time passed quickly. Finally, after a full day of assaulting the magic arrays and expending nearly all of the magic crystals in his bag, Shi Feng destroyed the 7th core magic array. As the 7th core magic array crumbled, the magic cage shattered. Chapter 2473, Dragon's Contractor. Finally, success. Shi Feng breathed a sigh of relief once the magic cage in the center of the island broke. He had somewhat underestimated the core magic arrays. Even with the magic elven cannon's power, it had taken over a full day's assault and nearly all of his magic crystals to destroy all 7 arrays. These magic arrays were even tougher Zero-Wing City's defensive magic array. The instant the magic cage shattered, the slumbering silver divine dragon opened its eyes and released a deafening roar, which echoed across the entire island, making the ground tremble. The infant dragon spread its wings, flapping them and creating a powerful storm that blew away the remains of its confinement. The storm's mighty winds even made Shi Feng stumble back from over 500 yards away. Is this the power of a true divine dragon? An indescribable astonishment filled Shi Feng as he gazed at the 50-meter-tall silver divine dragon. Silver divine dragon Auerbeck. Dragon mythic, level? HP? / He couldn't discern the divine dragon's level, but its statistics revealed that it was a bona fide Tier 4 mythic. Despite the fact that it was only a mythic monster, the silver divine dragon felt as if it had absolute dominance over the world around it. Even the high magic elf, Yulunium, was a weakling next to this silver divine dragon. Shi Feng had been able to resist, albeit slightly, Yulunium's power, but standing before Auerbeck, he couldn't even consider resisting. Movement was immensely difficult in Auerbeck's presence, much less fighting. If this infant dragon willed it, it could slay him with a thought, and he wouldn't even get the chance to summon a Tier 4 hero. Now free of its magic cage, Auerbeck landed before Shi Feng and asked, "Little human, are you responsible for releasing me from my cage?" Auerbeck's tone was mild and calm, but he radiated an insane pressure. When Shi Feng heard the divine dragon's question, he felt as if the heavens themselves were demanding an answer, and there was no room for lies. "Yes, Lord Divine Dragon. I destroyed the magic cage's core magic arrays and freed you," Shi Feng replied, his tone neither too humble nor too arrogant as he suppressed his building anxiety. Dragons were inherently prideful creatures. After all, they stood at the peak of God's domain and viewed lesser creatures with little to no importance. However, dragons were a race that also respected strength. If one proved themselves, they could earn dragons' recognition. Divine dragons were no exception to this. If he groveled before the silver divine dragon, Auerbach would look down on him, and his reward might be even less than if he had performed badly. "You have truly surprised me. I had never expected such a tiny being to destroy a cage set by a goddess," Auerbach said, surprise and curiosity flashing in his eyes as he watched Shi Feng. He looked at Shi Feng as if he had just seen an ant flip an elephant. "However, in my divine eyes, you are telling the truth. According to the ancient agreement, I will engage in a contract with you to serve as your companion since you have rescued me, but I am a divine dragon. A weakling will not qualify to stand beside me. First, you must pass my test. If you do, I will acknowledge you. You have 4 months to prove yourself. I will remain by your side during this time and fight with you. Of course, if you fail my test, our contract will be dissolved. Over the next 4 months, I will give you 3 chances to challenge my test. If you fail all 3, our contract will be dissolved. System, congratulations. You have rescued the divine dragon Auerbach and completed the first phase of the epic quest, Void Cage. Rewarding 10 legacy skill points. You have become a divine dragon's contractor. System, you have triggered the second phase of the epic quest, Void Cage. Quest content, complete Auerbach's test within 4 natural months. Rewards unknown. Sure enough, obtaining a divine dragon won't be so easy. The notifications didn't particularly surprise Shi Feng. I'll have to try and grow as strong as possible in the next 4 months. The various superpowers had sacrificed much to summon a Tier 5 creature with their summoning towers in the past. Some had even been required to kill Tier 5 NPCs to retain their summoned creatures and establish them as their fortress's true guardians. Although Auerbach was only a Tier 4 mythic, not even ordinary Tier 5 monsters would be a match for the divine dragon. It would be odd if no trial existed to retain control over such a creature. Fortunately, as far as Shi Feng was concerned, 4 months would be more than enough time for Shi Feng to prove himself a strong enough companion for Auerbach. As long as he could fully unlock his epic mana body and obtain the 3 last fragments of Solomon's sword, passing Auerbach's test shouldn't be a problem. The moment Auerbach finished his explanation, the divine dragon began to chant an incantation. A 4-fold magic array appeared around Shi Feng, rapidly shrinking until it transformed into a silver rune. The rune then imprinted itself on Shi Feng's arm before fading away. Shi Feng then received another system notification. System, you have obtained the Contractor's mark and become the divine dragon Auerbach's contractor. System, the Fortress Lord's token has discovered the Contractor's mark. Do you wish to let the divine dragon Auerbach serve the Starlight Fortress's guardian? Shi Feng agreed without a second thought, and once he did, a new tab, Contracted Companions, appeared in his system interface. He clicked on the tab and discovered Auerbach's statistics, which contain new information. Silver Divine Dragon Auerbach. Dragon Mythic, Level 111 HP 10 900 000 000/10 900 000 crap. Isn't his HP a little too high? Shi Feng nearly cursed aloud when he saw Auerbach's statistics. He had thought the Starlight Behemoth's 4 billion HP had been a little much for a level 113 mythic monster. If players wanted to kill such a boss with conventional methods, they'd need a 1,000-man team of Tier 3 players. Unless a team could deal -8 million damage per second, they'd never overcome the Realm Lord's battle recovery, much less kill it. With the Starlight Behemoth's horrific defense, ordinary Tier 3 experts would barely deal -10,000 damage with their attacks. Auerbach, however, was even more frightening. The Divine Dragon was only level 111, yet it had nearly 3 times as much HP as the Starlight Behemoth. Its battle recovery alone would regenerate 109 million HP every 5 seconds, and a Divine Dragon should have at least twice as high defense as the Realm Lord. Staring at Auerbach's statistics, Shi Feng doubted that even Tier 4 players could kill it, not to mention new Tier 3 players. While Shi Feng was shocked over Auerbach's astonishing attributes, the island under his feet began to tremble and fall apart. Now that the magic cage is gone, this island won't hold for much longer. We need to leave quickly, Auerbach warned his new human companion. The infant dragon began to chant another incantation, and in the blink of an eye, Shi Feng vanished and reappeared on Auerbach's back. The silver divine dragon then spread his wings and, with a flap, transformed into a streak of light, flying toward the spatial tear the summoning tower had opened and leaving the void land. Meanwhile, Divine Tribe's members were hard at work repairing the Starlight Fortress's infrastructure. They'd also begun constructing hotels and shops. To better manage the fortress, Divine Tribe had sent over 100 Tier 3 personal guards to garrison the fortress, all of which were tasked with patrolling the streets and protecting the fortress's various establishments. While Phythalia and the other Divine Tribe upper echelons planned the patrol routes for the personal guards, something odd happened to the summoning tower in the south end of the fortress. Divine runes began to appear around the lightless tower, illuminating the structure with a dazzling glow. Suddenly, an intense aura washed over the Starlight Fortress, and every player within felt stifled, struggling to move. Where is this aura coming from? What is going on over there? Did we miss a guardian boss? Everyone turned toward the brilliantly lit summoning tower, growing anxious. Even Phythalia and the guild's other upper echelons, who met in their temporary residence, wore grim expressions. None of the guardian bosses they had faced had such a powerful aura, yet Divine Tribe's team had still relied on a Tier 4 hero summoning scroll to defeat them. Even then, the Silver Lion Legion had suffered significant losses. Now that the Tier 4 hero they had summoned had gone, they didn't have a Tier 4 combatant in the fortress. If another guardian boss had truly appeared, the consequences would be dire. They had already invested a considerable amount of resources into repairing a portion of the Starlight Fortress. If they had to fight in another huge battle, everything they had worked for would crumble, even before the various superpowers experts arrived. Quick look. Something's above the summoning tower. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ew, isn't that a spatial tear? Why is there a spatial tear over the tower? The fortress's players recognized the dark tear for what it was immediately, and as it grew, they were overcome with curiosity and confusion. Suddenly, a streak of light flew from the spatial tear, and a figure appeared before them all. As they got a clearer look, what they saw rendered them all dumbfounded. A dragon? Chapter 2474, Fortress Startled. Why has a dragon appeared? Phythalia's expression darkened when she saw the divine dragon, which was over 100 meters long, in the sky. She had seen a dragon personally during a quest and was certain that it was a disastrous creature. Neither players nor NPCs, not even NPC cities, could stand before a dragon's might. She had watched a dark dragon destroy an empire's border city and annihilate any reinforcements the empire had sent. Players like her had only been able to watch as the dark dragon destroyed the NPC city and the Tier 4 NPC-led army. If the War God's Temple in the Empire hadn't sent its forces in time and eventually defeated the dark dragon, the creature would have even slaughtered the nearby players. Other than Phythalia, every Divine Tribe member in the Starlight Fortress panicked. Most of them had never seen the horror dragons could wreak, but they could all tell how terrifying the creatures were after seeing Auerbach's statistics. Auerbach's level of 111 wasn't anything special, but how did it have 10 billion HP? With the incredible defense of dragons, they would never overcome Auerbach's battle recovery, even if Auerbach stood there and allowed the tens of thousands of players in the fortress to attack. Compared to Auerbach's insane HP, the pressure the dragon radiated was nearly fatal to Divine Tribe's members. They were all experts, with hundreds of tough battles under their belts, yet they felt as if they were filled with lead as they bathed in Auerbach's dragon might. In this state, they'd be fortunate if they could muster the strength to flee, much less fight. Why is this happening? McCaffrey despaired as he watched the divine dragon soar above the Starlight Fortress. Like Phythalia, he had witnessed the power dragons wielded. Current players had practically no hope of defeating such a creature. Even if they still had their Tier 4 hero, they wouldn't stand a chance against this dragon. Still, Divine Tribe had gone to great lengths to secure its temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress, investing tons of manpower and resources to develop it. The loss of abandoning the fortress would be extraordinary. We don't have a choice. McCaffrey, notify all Tier 3 players and tell them to prepare for battle. I'll try to attract the dragon's attention while you get everyone out of the fortress. Once we convene, we'll try to lure it away, Phythalia said, taking in a deep breath as she prepared herself for a final struggle. They knew they were no match for the dragon, but if Auerbach wasn't here to capture the Starlight Fortress, they only needed to lure the creature away to save it. Isn't the price of this plan a little too high, Commander Fithalia? McCaffrey paled a bit when he heard the command. Fithalia wanted to lure the dragon out of the fortress, but even ordinary players would realize that Auerbach could likely kill Tier 3 players with a single hit. His commander intended to use their players' 1W Tier 3 experts as bait. The various superpowers Tier 3 experts were desperately grinding to level up. If they sacrificed so many of their guild's Tier 3 experts now, Divine Tribe would find itself at a disadvantage when it competed with the various superpowers later. This is our only option, Fithalia said. If we don't lure the dragon out of the fortress, everything we've invested thus far will go to waste. As long as we can draw the dragon out, we can recoup our losses with the Starlight Fortress's conveniences. I understand. Gritting his teeth, McCaffrey began to contact the Tier 3 players in the fortress. As Fithalia had said, the levels they'd have to sacrifice to lure Auerbach away would be nothing as long as they secured their hold on the Starlight Fortress. The fortress offered massive advantages after all. Suddenly, Crimson Witch interrupted, pointing at the Divine Dragon in astonishment. Commander Fithalia, it looks like there's a player on the dragon's back. A player? How is that possible? For a moment, Fithalia assumed Crimson Witch was hallucinating. They were talking about a Tier 4 dragon. Even if it were only an infant dragon, it still wouldn't degrade itself by serving as a mount, not even for Tier 4 or 5 NPCs. In God's domain, there were individuals known as Dragon Knights that could ride dragons after capturing and nurturing a Tier 3 newborn dragon. These Dragon Knights stood at the very apex of God's domain, and they even demanded respect from emperors. But riding a dragon was nothing but a dream with players' current strength. And yet, as soon as Fithalia finished her question and turned toward the Divine Dragon, the sight stunned her. She could actually see someone standing on Auerbach's back. Although she couldn't tell who it was due to the bright light emitting from the Divine Dragon, she could spot the green diamond marker, which only players possessed, hovering above the figure's head when she squinted. Before she could recover from her daze, however, Auerbach began to descend. As the Divine Dragon approached the ground, the green diamond marker became clearer. It wasn't long before many of the other Tier 3 experts in the fortress noticed it as well. How is that possible? A player can actually ride a dragon. Who is that? Surprise and confusion overwhelmed everyone as they stared at the figure on Auerbach's back. Commander Fithalia, it's coming toward us, Crimson Witch exclaimed when she realized that Auerbach was flying in their direction. When Auerbach had first appeared, the Divine Dragon had been too far away for her to notice anything peculiar. Fortunately, unlike Tier 2 players, she could, more or less, resist Auerbach's dragon might, but as the Divine Dragon approached, the pressure she felt grew stronger. Now even breathing became a challenge. Hopefully the dragon rider isn't an enemy. Everyone, prepare your instantaneous movement scrolls. If you notice even a hint of aggression, flee. Every life we can save matters. Fithalia reminded her comrades in a grim tone. If they had merely faced a wild dragon, they would, at worst, lose the Starlight Fortress, abandoning it and allowing the creature to destroy it. If the Divine Dragon were under a player's control, however, they had a much bigger problem. If that player wanted to, they could command their dragon to massacre every Divine Tribe member in the area. All of the guild members in the fortress were Divine Tribe's experts, including the guild's 2 trump card legions. If they were annihilated, the consequences would be unimaginably dire. Everyone around Fithalia did as they were told, pulling instantaneous movement scrolls from their bags. Crimson Witch and the guild's other upper echelons all retrieved Tier 3 instantaneous movement scrolls, trump cards the guild had prepared for them as a protective measure. These scrolls were incredibly rare, only obtainable by luck. While Divine Tribe's members in the temporary residence prepared to flee, Auerbach arrived above the building. The Divine Dragon's speed caught everyone off guard. Crimson Witch and the others were racked with hopelessness, realizing that they couldn't actually activate the scrolls in their hands. Worse, the instantaneous movement scrolls weren't the only thing that had abandoned them. They felt as if space itself had left them to die, siding with the Divine Dragon hovering above them. Spatial imprisonment? How is this happening? Astonished, Fithalia could do nothing but stare at the Divine Dragon as it began to land. Spatial imprisonment was a move only the strongest Tier 4 NPCs could use. No monster should be capable of mastering the skill. Yet, this dragon had a naturally occurring domain that included the spatial imprisonment's effects. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Now they had no hope of escape. This stranger held their lives in his hands. As Phythalia and her comrades' anguish reached its peak, a familiar voice reached their ears. "I was hoping to find you. I'm glad you're all here." As the dragon's rider spoke, he jumped down from Auerbach's back. Seeing the player up close, everyone was stupefied. Guild leader Black Flame? Chapter 2475, all sides shaken when they realized that the figure riding Auerbach had been Shi Feng. Silence fell in Divine Tribe's temporary residence as everyone stared at the swordsman. McCaffrey and Crimson Witch in particular, watched Shi Feng walk toward them with dropped jaws. They both felt as if they were looking at a monster with limitless strength. Whenever they thought that they had seen the depths of Shi Feng's, they soon learned that all they had seen was a fraction. Shi Feng's Crimson Dragon flying ship, for example, and the domain tools he had used to suppress the Starlight Behemoth and strengthen the Silver Lion Legion. The various superpowers coveted these items, yet they couldn't get their hands on them. Shi Feng, on the other hand, had them all. Moreover, Shi Feng had successfully captured the Starlight Fortress, a feat none of the various superpowers could accomplish at this stage of the game. And now, Shi Feng even had a dragon. Dragons were creatures of ultimate destruction in God's domain. Even the various NPC kingdoms and empires got headaches whenever one showed up, and yet, Shi Feng had one under his control. Even if Auerbach were only a Tier 4 infant dragon, it would be more than enough to deter the various superpowers from attacking the Starlight Fortress. So, this is why he's so confident. Realization dawned on Phythalia when she glanced at the divine dragon standing silently behind Shi Feng. She now had an inkling of why Shi Feng had rejected her proposal after learning that the Western continent's superpowers might band together to target his fortress. With Auerbach here, the superpowers experts would have to be suicidal to cause a ruckus in the Starlight Fortress. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape if Auerbach set his sights on them. Shortly after Shi Feng had arrived at Divine Tribe's temporary residence with Auerbach, some of the various superpowers spies reported the situation to their superiors. "Impossible. You're talking about a dragon. How can a player possibly control such a powerful monster?" When the various superpowers upper echelons read the reports, they assumed their subordinates had turned traitorous, trying to trick them with false information to prevent them from assaulting the Starlight Fortress. However, as these upper echelons continued to receive similar reports from other spies in Divine Tribe, they couldn't deny the truth. There was no way all of their spies had turned against them at once. To gain more information and a better understanding of the situation in the Starlight Fortress, they had secretly paid a huge price to turn some of Divine Tribe's members in the fortress to their side. Naturally, they had ensured that none of the bribed players knew about each other to prevent these players from collaborating to provide false information for Divine Tribe's benefit. Although the reports were unbelievable, it was undeniable after receiving reports from over a dozen spies. Once they had verified the information, a commotion swept through the various superpowers. Some of the superpowers that had planned to assault the fortress began to hesitate. They carefully considered whether or not they should oppose Shi Feng and the Divine Tribe with the rest of the superpowers. Before the dragon had appeared, they had been 90% sure that they could take the Starlight Fortress. Even if they failed, they'd ensure that no one could use the fortress, even if Divine Tribe sent all of its experts to protect it. However, the situation had changed. If they tried to take the fortress with a Tier 4 Dragon Guard, they'd suffer severe losses. Players didn't have a snowflake's chance in hell of defeating a Tier 4 dragon, which was a fact the various superpowers had long since verified. Since God's Domain's launch, dragons had been responsible for the destruction of many NPC border cities. The Western continent proved to be far more dangerous than the East. Of course, if they gave up on this operation, they'd have a very difficult time finding another opportunity to move against the Starlight Fortress. The fortress had only recently been captured, and even if Divine Tribe had invested a ton of manpower and resources in its repairs, the guild couldn't fully repair the fortress in 3 short days. The Starlight Fortress was at its weakest right now. If they did not assault the Starlight Fortress now, taking it would only become more challenging as time passed. While the various superpowers considered their next move, a 300-man team attacked a demonic creature army camp in a level 100 neutral map not far from Star Valley. Not only did this campsite house over 6,000 demonic creatures, but everyone was level 110. These demonic creatures were even led by a level 112, mythic-ranked 8-eyed Scorpion King. Despite such a powerful force, however, the 300-man team held an overwhelming advantage in the battle. They even overwhelmed the Scorpion King, not to mention the level 110 Grand Lords. The army's boss couldn't manage to deal any significant damage, while the 300-man team continued to chip away at its HP. The team hadn't suffered a single casualty, even by the time the Scorpion King fell. In contrast, demonic creature corpses littered the ground. We really got lucky this time. Not only did we find a demonic creature campsite, but the Scorpion King also dropped a level 100+ epic battle axe. Thunder, this axe should go to you, a thin man in pitch-black armor said as he handed the battle axe to another man, who stood nearly 3 meters tall and was covered in runes. If McCaffrey had seen this, he would have been astonished. This team was the Hell Legion, the Netherworld Empire's strongest trump card legion. Every member was a Tier 3 player, and they all had the combat standards to rival Grand Lords of the same level. The thin man, shrouded in a dense, lethal aura, felt as powerful as a mythic monster. Commander, we've just received a report from the higher-ups. They claim that a Tier 4 infant dragon is guarding the Starlight Fortress, and because of this, many superpowers have abandoned the notion of assaulting the fortress. Our superiors are warning us to be careful. A Tier 3 black-clad assassin suddenly informed the thin man. An infant dragon? The man's lips curled into a smile. How interesting. It's no wonder why they captured the Starlight Fortress disregarding the consequences, but if they think that can stop us, they're mistaken. Other superpowers might be afraid of the dragon that protected the Starlight Fortress, but the Hell Legion was not. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The reason was very simple. There was only one dragon in the fortress, while the Hell Legion had 300 players. If the Hell Legion went on a rampage inside the fortress, they could slay hundreds or thousands of players before the dragon would reach them. They'd also be able to escape the dragon's pursuit. They weren't concerned that they couldn't take down the Starlight Fortress in the least. Commander, I've received another important message. You've received a request to negotiate with Phythalia, the black-clad assassin added. Phythalia? The thin man smiled when he heard the name. Since an old friend has so graciously invited me, I must show her the proper respect. Pack up, everyone. We're heading to the Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2476, Frightening Divine Dragon Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. With Hell Rush in the lead, the Hell Legion finally reached the Starlight Fortress after more than 5 hours of continuous fighting. The fortress had already undergone 2 days of repairs and looked nothing like it had. Not only did the fortress have a new physical look, but its magic array was now fully active as well. A layer of mana enveloped the fortresses, creating an oasis in the Star Valley's mana-thin environment. Moreover, a faint layer of mist surrounded the fortress walls, adding hints of mystery and solemnity. This ancient fortress is amazing. Its mana is so dense. If we could train in the fortress long-term, our mana control would improve significantly. That's not all. If we can live and train here, we could even improve our combat standards. It's no wonder why the higher-ups asked us to take action. If we can take this fortress, we could boost our internal and core members' development speed. We wouldn't have to compete for entry slots to the demonic Mist Secret Land every week. When the Hell Legion members saw the Starlight Fortress in the distance, their eyes glowed with excitement. The Western continent lacked mana, which was why areas with high mana density became targets for the various superpowers. Players could improve their mana affinity when in those areas, and they'd have a clearer mind while training. This would be of great help as players tried to gain more control over mana. Because of this, whenever a player discovered a mana-dense area, a war between guilds shortly followed. Even the various superpowers participated. Of the mana-dense environments the Hell Legion's members had experienced thus far, none could hold a candle to the Starlight Fortress. The fortress's mana was dense enough that it would even be extremely helpful to experts of their caliber. Commander, Divine Tribe is behaving strangely. They've only sent one party to guard the front gate. They didn't even bother to send a Tier 3 NPC. Aren't they afraid that players will barge in? A Tier 3 ranger in blue leather armor commented when he only saw 6 Tier 2 players by the Starlight Fortress's entrance. In the West, ruling guilds were even required to dispatch Tier 3 NPC guards to the fortress that already had NPCs. The front gate was every fortress's weakest point, even with the defensive magic array active. If a team attacked the front gate before the gate's defensive mechanisms could be engaged, they could destroy the gate and open the fortress to invasion. Thus, powers typically sent in plenty of powerful Tier 3 NPCs to protect the front gate after capturing a fortress. Divine Tribe, however, had done the exact opposite. The guild hadn't even sent a single Tier 3 player to protect the Starlight Fortress's gate, much less Tier 3 NPCs. Moreover, there were only 6 Tier 2 players by the entrance. Divine Tribe was practically begging for another power to attack. Even if the guild wasn't worried about hostile forces destroying the front gate, it was still an important location. Players would hand over their entrance fees at the gate after all, and those coins would be kept in the gate's storage before being transported to the Fortress Lord's mansion at regular intervals. If players plundered the coins during delivery or from the gate's storage, the ruling power would suffer for its lack of security. That's not our concern. Get ready, everyone. We're going in, Hell Rush declared, ignoring Divine Tribe's careless organization. As far as he was concerned, whether or not Divine Tribe sent Tier 3 NPCs to guard the front gate didn't matter to the Hell Legion. If the Hell Legion wanted to break that gate down, Divine Tribe couldn't stop them. Following their orders, the Hell Legion's members summoned their advanced ranked guild mounts, the Magic Horn Steed. The Magic Horn Steeds were large, the size of adult elephants. When 300 Magic Horn Steeds charged as a group, even the ground trembled under their hooves. Once the Legion reached the gate, however, the party of 6 remained indifferent. They neither seemed afraid nor awed by the sight of the mighty Hell Legion. Rather, they calmly approached Hell Rush. "May I know why you're all here?" a level 105 Tier 2 knight asked. Fearlessly, he explained, "The fortress is still sealed and uninvited players cannot enter. We've received an invitation from Commander Phythalia. You may notify her that the Hell Legion has arrived," Hell Rush proudly announced, looking down at the 6 Divine Tribe members before him. "So, you're Commander Phythalia's guests. I'll contact her for authorization immediately. Please wait a moment." When the Tier 2 Guardian Knight heard that the Hell Legion were here at Phythalia's request, he contacted the commander and asked her to grant Hell Rush and his companions permission to enter the fortress. Not long after the Guardian Knight reported to his superior, he began to chant an incantation while watching the Hell Legion. Once he finished, a runic mark appeared on the back of their hands. "All right, you now have temporary permission to enter the Starlight Fortress," the Tier 2 Guardian Knight informed the guests. He then warned them with a heavy tone, "However, before you go in, I must inform you of something. Currently, a dragon is resting in the fortress, and the mana isn't fully stable yet. So, once you enter the fortress, I hope that you won't cause too much of a commotion. You shouldn't anger the dragon. If it decides to act, we won't be able to stop it. I hope you can understand." As the Tier 2 Guardian Knight finished his warning, the Hell Legion's members couldn't contain their grins. They acted as if the Guardian Knight had told the funniest joke in the world. Surely this Tier 2 Guardian Knight was trying to scare them. But who were they exactly? They were members of Netherworld Empire's strongest trump card Legion. They had encountered dragons far more often than the various superpowers experts. They knew just how powerful a Tier 4 dragon was. They were even confident of defeating one, much less surviving its wrath. After all, it wouldn't be the first time. Even if they weren't a match for the Starlight Fortress's dragon, they had plenty of methods to escape its pursuit. Divine Tribe was dreaming if it thought one measly dragon could make them behave in the Starlight Fortress. "We understand. Can we go in now?" Hell Rush asked dryly. "Of course." Realizing that the man before him paid no heed to the warning, the Tier 2 Guardian Knight could only sigh and nod in reply. He signaled for his subordinates to make way for the Hell Legion. Divine Tribe's guard stepped aside, and Hell Rush led his legion into the Starlight Fortress atop their magic-honed steeds. The mounts left clouds of dust in their wake, and the ground within a 100-yard radius of the Legion trembled. The Hell Legion had no intention of keeping a low profile. As the Hell Legion entered the fortress, however, they felt an intense pressure bear down on them, and every member of the Legion struggled to move. Some of them nearly fell off their steeds. What's going on? Why is there such immense pressure in the fortress? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU questions filled the Legion members' minds as they fought through the stifling pressure. Before they could find an answer themselves, however, a gigantic figure descended from above. Not only did this figure's wings blot out the sky, but it also made the magic horn steeds kneel and tremble. The mighty mounts were no longer under the Hell Legion's control. This colossal figure was none other than the silver divine dragon Auerbeck. The instant Auerbeck landed before the Hell Legion, the Legion's members realized something that left them shaken. Spatial imprisonment? But how? The Hell Legion's members sensed that space around them had seemingly frozen, and they couldn't help but gasp. At the same time, their expressions turned indescribably grim. Chapter 2477, Heaven-defying capabilities. The Hell Legion members had heard of spatial imprisonment before. In fact, they were very familiar with the ability. Quite a few special regions on the western continent were affected by spatial imprisonment, in which players couldn't use any tools. It wasn't an uncommon effect. However, sensing the spatial imprisonment here had a different meaning. Here, it was one of the dragon's passive abilities. Crap. How are they so blessed by the system? Not only did it give them such a powerful dragon, but the dragon can even use spatial imprisonment. Who could possibly stop that? Thunder Beast, a primitive man that stood at nearly 3 meters tall, cursed as he lost his earlier complacence. The Hell Legion knew how powerful dragons were. Not only had they encountered multiple dragons in the past, but they had also clashed with a few of them. This was why they had dared to venture to the Starlight Fortress, even after learning that a dragon guarded it. Of all the dragons they had come across, however, none came close to comparing with the silver divine dragon standing before them. It was only a tier 4 infant dragon, yet the dragon might Auerbach radiated made it difficult to move. Not even the tier 5 dark magic dragon they had met could do this. To make matters worse, Auerbach had mastered spatial imprisonment, which only a few Apex tier 4 NPCs could master. The Hell Legion had no chance against such a foe. Once he landed, Auerbach quietly observed the Hell Legion, and its members froze under the dragon's gaze. Auerbach then approached the Legion as they watched his every step. The closer Auerbach got, the stronger the pressure the Hell Legion members felt became. The Hell Legion's members began to regret their decision to come to the fortress, realizing they had acted a little too rashly. Had they judged the dragon's strength properly before causing a scene in the fortress, they wouldn't have been caught off guard. Wolf, your group will activate the mana barrier. Hell Rush shouted at the tier 3 ranger beside him after seeing his teammates' growing despair. The rest of you will use that chance to retreat. Auerbach was far stronger than he had expected, but Divine Tribe was dreaming if it thought it could corner the Hell Legion with one dragon. If any other superpowers trump card legion stood in the Hell Legion's place, they'd be helpless. But the Hell Legion wasn't just any legion. No ordinary super guild could match the legacies and ancient technology Netherworld Empire had obtained. The blue-clad ranger, Black Wolf, and the several players beside him gritted their teeth as they each pulled a dark gray crystal from their bags. They then began to chant an incantation. Dense mana radiated out from Black Wolf and his comrades. It formed a pitch-black barrier that swallowed the Hell Legion. Once the magic barrier had taken shape, the Hell Legion members were freed from Auerbach's spatial imprisonment. Hell Rush released a held breath in a deep, relieved sigh. He then commanded, "Good. Everyone use your return scroll and retreat." The mana barrier was Netherworld Empire's greatest creation. This barrier couldn't suppress their enemies, but it would create a domain for a short time, freeing the players within from any restrictive effects. With the help of the mana barrier, players could even use return scrolls in areas that prohibited their use. Moreover, the defensive barrier would prevent anything from entering once active. The mana barrier was the best life-saving and defensive tool currently available in God's domain. Hell Rush had wanted to save the mana barrier for their assault on the Fortress Lord's mansion, but right now he couldn't care less about that. With their commander's order echoing in their ears, the Legion's members retrieved their return scrolls and began to activate them. Meanwhile, Auerbach swiped at the barrier with a claw. Boom. A massive explosion shook the Starlight Fortress as Auerbach's claw collided with the mana barrier. However, the attack didn't even crack the barrier, much less shatter it. This scene left the nearby Divine Tribe members stupefied. They had never expected the Hell Legion to have such a powerful card. They had already witnessed the Silver Divine Dragon's strength. Ordinary Tier 4 mythics were children in comparison. And yet, the mana barrier remained intact even after taking a blow from the Divine Dragon. The barrier's defensive strength was even greater than the Starlight Fortress's walls when the magic array had been inactive. So what if you have a Tier 4 dragon? You're 100 years too early if you think you can make an example of the Hell Legions. Thunder Beast laughed when Auerbach failed to destroy the mana barrier. Alright, enough. The Starlight Fortress is much stronger than we initially anticipated. We need to revise our plan once we return, Hell Rush warned his teammates, realizing that Thunder Beast wanted to linger. He had wanted to show off the Hell Legion's power before Phythalia and Divine Tribe's other upper echelons, but he had never dreamed that their dragon would be so astoundingly strong. The Hell Legion hadn't suffered any casualties, but they had sacrificed an important magic array, which was a minor loss. Of course, this experience also showed the depths of the Starlight Fortress's defenses. Auerbach might be very powerful, But if Netherworld Empire planned its next move carefully, negotiating a partnership with Divine Tribe would still be possible. As Hell Rush and his companions were in the midst of activating their return scrolls, a voice called out to them. "You guys just got to the Starlight Fortress. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" With the question, space within the fortress seemed to shake. Following which, a phantom world washed over the fortress, isolating it from the outside world. While the phantom world took over, the mana barrier's domain waned. Although the barrier remained in place, the mana within began to corrode. A second later, the Hell Legion members discovered that mana had stopped flowing within their return scrolls, and as a result, the magic arrays under their feet began to crumble, eventually disappearing altogether. It stunned every member of the Hell Legion. What was going on? The mana barrier was still up, so why couldn't they teleport? Something's actually suppressed the mana barrier? Black Wolf, in particular, was stunned when he sensed that he no longer had control of the mana around him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The mana barrier could wrestle control of a specified space, even within a forbidden land that prevented teleportation. However, something had suppressed it, and thoroughly. The Hell Legion members' plummeting basic attributes and physiques made this much clear. Understanding that they had missed their chance to teleport away from the Starlight Fortress, the Hell Legion's members couldn't help but turn toward the voice's origin. After this person had asked their question, their ability to teleport had been taken from them. The speaker must have something to do with that. The Hell Legion's members found that the voice had come from Auerbach's back. Due to the Divine Dragon's natural glow, they hadn't noticed the man, but squinting to see through the light, they discovered that someone was actually riding the Divine Dragon, standing on his back. "So, you're Zero Wings Guild leader, Black Flame?" Hell Rush asked, staring at the player perched on the silver Divine Dragon. Chapter 2478, True Foundations. Hell Rush's question stunned the rest of the Hell Legion in the mana barrier. They all stared at Shi Feng in astonishment. Is he really human? They had heard that Shi Feng had something to do with the silver Divine Dragon, but they had never thought that he would be capable of controlling it and be able to suppress the mana barrier. Having either power would overjoy any of God's domain superpowers. Both a dragon and a domain treasure would be incredibly useful when defending fortresses and rendering other superpowers' attacks useless. And now they learned that Shi Feng had both. It was absurd. "That's correct. I'm Black Flame," Shi Feng replied, nodding. "I never could have guessed how much strength you've hidden. The various superpowers' heads are already aching over your dragon, yet your power isn't limited to the creature." Hell Rush could not help his bitter smile as he spoke to Shi Feng. The Hell Legion admits defeat. Although the mana barrier was still around them, and they had quite a few more to protect themselves from Auerbach, the magic arrays were meaningless if they couldn't teleport out of the Starlight Fortress. It would only be a matter of time before they ran out of mana barriers. Without the barrier to protect them, they wouldn't have a hope of escaping the Divine Dragon. As for trying to face Auerbach in battle, that would be futile. They could barely move under the infant dragon's dragon might, much less fight. In other words, the Hell Legion was utterly at Shi Feng's mercy. Rather than waste time with pretenses, Hell Rush thought it wise to surrender. However, after his statement, he and his team heard a clear, soft voice. "Commander Rush, I'm afraid we have a misunderstanding. I invited you here at Guild Leader Black Flame's request. Since you are the Starlight Fortress's esteemed guest, Black Flame decided to welcome you personally." Another figure stood from her position on Auerbach's back. It was Phythalia, the Divine Hymn Legion's commander. "Welcome us." Hell Rush rolled his eyes. Why would anyone use a dragon to welcome guests? Not only had Shi Feng arrived on the back of his dragon, but he had also used a domain tool. Did they really consider this a proper welcome? The rest of the Hell Legion glared at Phythalia. Even a fool would recognize this display as a warning. However, they had no choice but to endure the act. "This isn't a suitable place for our conversation, Commander Rush. Let's continue inside the Fortress Lord's mansion," Shi Feng said, unconcerned with whether Hell Rush believed Phythalia or not. He then leaped off of Auerbach and cancelled Miniature World before leading his guests toward the mansion. The Hell Legion's several vice commanders looked toward their leader, wondering how Hell Rush would respond. "Since we're already here, we might as well talk," Hell Rush muttered to his vice commanders. He couldn't tell what Shi Feng was after, and the swordsman currently held the Hell Legion's fate in his hands. Hence he decided to concede. Hell Rush then followed Shi Feng to the Starlight Fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion. Meanwhile, His vice-commanders instructed the rest of the Legion's members to find a place to rest before they followed. When Hell Rush and his entourage walked toward the Fortress Lord's mansion, located in the fortress's core, they were shocked. As they grew closer to the mansion, they could feel the mana growing denser. They sensed that the mana around them had already become 30% denser when they were only halfway to their destination. A 30% increase could raise their training efficiency with combat techniques, skills, and spells by at least 50%, and it would be particularly prominent when practicing advanced and bronze combat techniques. Training in this environment would yield even better results than when they trained in the mana-dense secret lands under Netherworld Empire's control. What is that place? Hell Rush asked, noticing an ancient tower a short distance away from the Fortress Lord's mansion. The tower only had 5 floors, but the concentration of mana around it was second only to the Fortress Lord's mansion. Even in the Starlight Fortress's high mana environment, the tower stood out like a shining beacon. That's the fortress prison, Phythalia explained. It's where we intend to keep players who cause trouble, similar to the prisons in NPC cities. It's the same as the prisons in NPC cities? Hell Rush wore a grim expression after hearing Phythalia's answer. His vice-commanders stared at the ancient tower in horror. If they died within the fortress, they would, at most, lose a level and a piece of equipment. With the Hell Legion's strength, they could recover from the losses in no time. But none of them wanted to face imprisonment after a death. That outcome would be even worse than if they died 3 or 4 times in a row. Time was more important than money in God's domain, especially for frontline players. Opportunity waited for no man. They would only have the highest chances of growing stronger by maintaining their positions at the forefront of the game's player base, and they might even find a rare opportunity that could change their fates. If they were stuck in jail for 5 or 6 days, however, they'd fall behind and catching up would be insanely difficult. A dragon? A domain tool? Those were insignificant compared to the fortress prison. Auerbach might be able to annihilate the Hell Legion with the help of a domain tool, but the Legion's members would recover to their peak in 3 or 4 days. They might even become stronger than they had been. Spending a handful of days in the prison, on the other hand, would cripple the Legion. Catching up would take at least 1 to 2 months. The fortress prison alone was more than enough to deter any power from assaulting the Starlight Fortress. While Hell Rush and his vice-commanders secretly plotted to investigate the fortress prison, they arrived at the mansion. The Fortress Lord's mansion was now fully repaired and looked like a castle from a fantasy novel. An ancient, mysterious aura surrounded the castle, and the ambient mana within its vicinity was mesmerizing. There was simply no comparison between the mana here and the mana in the rest of the fortress. For a moment, Hell Rush and the others even had the urge to stay for the rest of their lives. Guild leader Black Flame, may I know what business you have with us? If you'd like to discuss something, please get to the point. I'm not fond of posturing in word games, Hell Rush told Shi Feng seriously. Hell Rush now had a good understanding of the Starlight Fortress's situation. In his opinion, capturing or causing a ruckus in the fortress was simply impossible for the various superpowers, including Netherworld Empire. He couldn't think of a reason that Shi Feng would specifically invite the Hell Legion to talk. Now that you've seen the Starlight Fortress for yourselves, I'm sure you're quite interested in the fortress. I've asked you here to negotiate an alliance. Although I can't offer a temporary residence, I would like to offer Netherworld Empire's members a 40% discount on all basic expenditures within the Starlight Fortress, Shi Feng explained, chuckling. 40%? Are you serious? The offer instantly tempted Hell Rush. Star Valley was a forbidden land far away from civilization, and travel to the map was incredibly inconvenient. This was precisely the reason that Netherworld Empire wanted the Starlight Fortress's sole temporary residence. If his guild could secure a residence within Star Valley, Netherworld Empire's members could teleport to the Forbidden Land, saving plenty of travel time and coins. Although not having a temporary residence would be inconvenient, a 40% discount on all basic expenditures within this fortress would allow Netherworld Empire to save a ton on development costs. Basic expenditures weren't limited to facilities such as hotels. Entrance fees would be included as well, which players had to pay every time they wanted to enter the fortress. The discount wouldn't be a major issue if Netherworld Empire only wished to send a few hundred players, but if the guild sent thousands, a 40% discount could save them an astronomical amount of money. Of course. Shi Feng nodded. What do you need us to do? Hell Rush asked. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU with the fortress prison, the Starlight Fortress's operations would be unshakable. Logically, Zero Wing and Divine Tribe shouldn't need Netherworld Empire's help to safeguard the fortress. I wish to borrow the entire Hell Legion for a mission, Shi Feng declared. Borrow the Hell Legion? Hell Rush stared at the swordsman in confusion. What do you want us to do? Zero Wing had already allied with Divine Tribe, which was a super first-rate guild and even stronger than some super guilds. It was no exaggeration to claim that Divine Tribe could deal with most matters in the West with relative ease. Zero Wing shouldn't need the Hell Legion's strength for anything. It's nothing major. I only wish to enter Star Valley's God Mode regional dungeon to retrieve an item, Shi Feng stated calmly. Chapter 2479, Starlight's shocking transformation. Everyone was stunned when they heard Shi Feng's goal. None of them had ever thought he'd be crazy enough to enter Star Valley's God Mode regional dungeon. Not only was God Mode the highest difficulty for a regional dungeon in God's domain, but the dungeon in Star Valley was also a level 100+ regional dungeon. Although the dungeon had abundant resources to offer, it had dangers far beyond what current players faced in the outside world. A few superpowers had sent Tier 3 teams into the dungeon not long ago, but in the end they had been forced to retreat after less than 30 minutes inside and lost half their members. After those losses, the various superpowers temporarily gave up on the dungeon. The dungeon wasn't only dangerous because of the extremely powerful monsters within, but because of its harsh environment. Once in the regional dungeon, players would face a much higher gravitational force. Even Tier 3 players struggled to move under such pressure. To make matters worse, the monsters that called the dungeon home had high combat standards. Guild leader Black Flame, I wish I could agree to your offer, but the Star Tomb is no place for current players. Our basic attributes may remain the same inside, but that place significantly limits our mobility. Just fighting the level 105 Great Lords in the dungeon is a massive challenge, not to mention the level 105 Grand Lords, Hell Rush explained after taking a deep breath. Although Shi Feng's offer was wildly tempting, the idea of entering the Star Tomb was a joke. While inside the Star Tomb, Tier 3 players' mobility would be reduced to Tier 1 standards, and to make matters worse, the increased gravity didn't affect the dungeon's monsters. And that wasn't all. Most importantly, players' stamina consumption would skyrocket during combat in such a high-gravity environment. If players ventured too far into the Star Tomb, they could lose their lives due to stamina depletion. Moreover, players couldn't teleport out of the regional dungeon, even with Netherworld Empire's mana barrier. If they weren't very careful, they could easily team wipe. I understand your concerns, Commander Rush, but if we succeed, I'm willing to reserve 8 of the mana training rooms in the Fortress Lord's Mansion for Netherworld Empire. Of course, we'll calculate the fees separately, Shi Feng informed his guest with a chuckle. I'm sure you've sensed how dense the mana is in the mansion, but the mana training rooms have even denser mana. Aside from securing various rare materials, there was another reason that Shi Feng had traveled to the Western continent. He wanted the Star of Light. Without the Star of Light, he had no chance of revitalizing the Tree of Life's withered main branch. The Star of Light was a legendary material that was only available on the Western continent. To be precise, it could only be found within the Star Tomb. Based on the information he had from the past, 3 of the Star Tomb Stars of Light had dropped while players had explored the regional dungeon for the first time. With the Star Tomb untouched, this was the perfect opportunity to secure one for himself. If he missed this opportunity, his chances of obtaining the legendary material would be miserably low by the time he organized another expedition to the west. To enter the regional dungeon, players had to have reached Tier 3 at the very least. Players couldn't enter until then. Moreover, a 100-man team wouldn't be nearly enough to explore the dungeon. Shi Feng would need at least 500 players to pull off his plan. Unfortunately, organizing a team of 500 Tier 3 players would be incredibly difficult at this stage of the game. Thus far, only the 5 great super guilds could manage it. Hence, Shi Feng had asked Phythalia to invite Hell Rush to negotiate a deal. The mana training room? Hell Rush's eyes glowed when Shi Feng offered the additional benefit. When he had entered the Fortress Lord's mansion, he had sensed the extraordinary mana within. It was, by far, the most mana-dense location he had ever visited. If Netherworld Empire's experts could train in the mansion, their efficiency would skyrocket. Yet, Shi Feng had just told him that the mana training rooms had even denser mana. If such an astounding training environment truly existed, they could develop their mana control and unlock their mana bodies with unprecedented speed. Please take your time to consider the offer carefully, Commander Rush. If we encounter a situation within the Star Tomb that we cannot overcome, you may retreat, and the benefits I offer will remain yours, Shi Feng clarified. Your offer will still stand? Hellrush could not ignore the temptation. Then I agree. However, if my team risks annihilation, we will pull back immediately. If you can accept that condition, we're willing to work with you. Hellrush wasn't sure what Shi Feng's goal was, but he couldn't afford to reject the offer. Mana was the root of all things on the Western continent, which the various powers desperately fought for. Since capturing the Starlight Fortress was now impossible, he had to aim for the next best thing, and the mana training rooms would allow his guild's experts to unlock their mana bodies far sooner. Once they did, Netherworld Empire would be able to surpass the two of the other 5 great super guilds based in the West when it came to experts with fully unlocked mana bodies. That won't be a problem, Shi Feng answered. He could sympathize with Hellrush. The Star Tomb was, after all, a level 100+ God mode regional dungeon and, as such, far more dangerous than the outside world. The various superpowers had suffered severe losses to clear the Star Tomb during his previous life, and that was after they had formed the minimum 500-man teams. Luckily, the current Hell Legion would be more than enough for his purposes. His goal wasn't to explore all of the Star Tomb, just obtain a Star of Light. The Star of Light was a random drop in the Star Tomb, which meant that even the weakest monsters had a chance of dropping it. Raiding the dungeon's bosses wouldn't be necessary. Adventurer teams had claimed 3 of the regional dungeon Stars of Light in the past, and all 3 teams had done so in the tomb's outer region. Those adventurer teams had merely been grinding for magic crystals, but they had lucked out and acquired Stars of Light instead, becoming rich overnight. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Since no one had explored the Star Tomb yet, they should have a high likelihood of obtaining at least 1 Star of Light. Following which, Shi Feng signed a contract with Hellrush stating that Netherworld Empire's members would enjoy a 40% discount on the Starlight Fortress's basic expenditures. In addition, 8 of the Fortress Lord's mana training rooms would be reserved for the guild, with each costing 300 magic crystals per hour. In exchange, Shi Feng would have temporary command of the Hell Legion once they were inside the Star Tomb, and this would remain in effect until Shi Feng completed his task or the team encountered more trouble than they could handle. In addition, Netherworld Empire would dispatch experts to defend the Starlight Fortress alongside Zero Wing and Divine Tribe. Once they had signed the contract, the alliance between Zero Wing and Netherworld Empire was set in stone. Not long after, news of their partnership spread like the plague, reaching the various superpowers in no time at all. This ignited a commotion among the various superpowers that had aimed to take the Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2480, Starlight Fortress Unsealed. What did you say? The Hell Legion agreed? Impossible. The Hell Legion has 300 Tier 3 experts and every one of them is a lunatic. When the various superpowers received news of the Hell Legion's decision, they found it hard to believe. They had assumed the Starlight Fortress was doomed once the Hell Legion had gotten involved. Even if they didn't capture the fortress, they were sure to leave it in ruins. They were all familiar with what kind of team the Hell Legion was. It was a team of madmen. The Starlight Fortress might be impressive for its dragon guard, but after all was said and done, it only had 1 dragon. 1 dragon wasn't nearly enough to keep all 300 Hell Legion members in check. They weren't ordinary Tier 3 experts, and as long as they had a chance of victory, they'd repeatedly resurrect their members and assault the Starlight Fortress until only one side remained. This was why the various superpowers were so afraid of the Hell Legion. And yet, the situation had developed in such an unexpected way. The Hell Legion hadn't even started a decent battle, much less taken the fortress. The Legion had actually allied with the ruling power after a short discussion. Moreover, the Hell Legion had agreed to a partnership that didn't include shares of the fortress. The various superpowers' upper echelons even wondered if the reports were about the Hell Legion they knew so well. While the news spread, the various superpowers who had been preparing to assault the Starlight Fortress hesitated. They had only dared to target the Starlight Fortress because Netherworld Empire had expressed interest in capturing it, but now that the Super Guild had joined the fortress's ruling power, the situation had become disastrous for the various superpowers. These superpowers weren't afraid of Divine Tribe. The guild only had a few more Tier 3 experts than the rest of them. If they joined forces, however, they could easily outnumber Divine Tribe, and since the Starlight Fortress only provided players partial authority, capturing it would be child's play. But now that Netherworld Empire had allied with Divine Tribe, causing a scene in the fortress would be difficult and dangerous. Aside from the Legion members' individual strength, The Hell Legion had enough Tier 3 players that it could rival the total number in several superpowers. Including the dragon, how were the various superpowers supposed to cause enough chaos to take the fortress from Divine Tribe? Of course, these superpowers weren't willing to give up just yet. Although they knew that securing a share of the Starlight Fortress's profits was no longer possible, they still sent a large number of experts to investigate the situation within. The fortress benefits were related to too many of their interests, and they would jump at any opportunity to gain a fraction of what the Starlight Fortress had to offer. Meanwhile, in the Azure Chamber of Commerce's distant demonic silver mine, even the Hell Legion has failed? Yan Xiaoqian muttered, stunned after reading her subordinate's report. She had already been astonished to learn that Shi Feng and Divine Tribe had cooperated to capture the Starlight Fortress. Then she had heard about the fortress's draconic resident. And now, even the fearsome Hell Legion had compromised. If she hadn't known anything about Shi Feng's group, she would have assumed they belonged to some hidden superpower that developed in the Western continent's shadows. However, she knew more than a little about that group of players. Shi Feng had arrived on the Western continent with 9 companions, all members of Zero Wing. When they had arrived, Zero Wing hadn't had a single ally in the West. Yet, not only had Shi Feng's group established a foothold in the West after only a few days, but they had even gained 2 powerful allies. The Azure Chamber of Commerce had spent over a month establishing itself in the East. The chamber had only made a place for itself in the Dark Hills, outside of the Fire Dragon Empire's border, after investing tons of resources and manpower in the endeavor. Moreover, the Azure had only accomplished its goal because it had gathered players and secured connections on the Eastern continent early in the game. If it hadn't, securing a foothold in the East would have taken much longer. Shi Feng, however, had secured the Starlight Fortress in less than 4 days, driving the Western continent's various superpowers crazy. Young miss, we don't have much time left before the competition between families. The family has already ensured that you'll have use of the trial grounds. They hope you will cherish the opportunity and restore the reputation the family lost during the prior competition. Please don't let other matters distract you, an amiable old man advised, sitting next to Yan Xiaoqian in one of the mine's lounges. I understand. Zero Wing merely has a foothold in the West and access to more resources now. It still isn't nearly powerful enough to help Silent Wonder win the family's annual competition, Yan Xiaoqian said, nodding. Once she had calmed her flustered heart, her confidence returned. Zero Wing might now have a place on the Western continent, but whether or not it could develop in the West was a different matter entirely. The guild's greatest enemy wasn't the Western continent's various superpowers, but the demonic creature armies. As a forbidden land, no kingdom or empire protected Star Valley. In other words, the Starlight Fortress would face the full brunt of the demonic creature armies without NPC help. It was easy to imagine how much danger the fortress was in. Even if Divine Tribe and Netherworld Empire cooperated, they couldn't necessarily protect the fortress from the demonic creature's invasion. Even if Zero Wing defended its hold on the Starlight Fortress, that had nothing to do with helping Silent Wonder. The guild's foundation in the West was newborn, and the Western continent's training grounds were superior to those in the East. In that case, young miss, we should go, the old man insisted. She nodded in response, but she couldn't help but gaze toward Star Valley. Just you wait. I will not let Silent Wonder defeat me in this competition. Yan Xiaoqian inwardly swore, recalling Shi Feng's utter disregard for her and Azure before leaving the demonic silver mine. Her family had paid a huge price to get her access to the trial grounds. This was an opportunity that few in God's domain could enjoy. As long as she could complete the trial, she could even defeat Shi Feng, let alone Silent Wonder. While Yan Xiaoqian left the demonic silver mine atop her flying mount, Shi Feng led the Hell Legion to Star Valley's inner region. Even Tier 3 players could lose their lives in the Star Valley's outer region, to say nothing of the level 100+ Forbidden Lands inner area. The lowest leveled monsters in the inner region were level 110, and they generally moved in groups with Grand Lord leaders. Each of these groups consisted of over 1,000 monsters, with some of the larger groups having 2,000 or 3,000. They were practically roaming armies. If a 100-man Tier 3 team encountered these monsters, the slightest mistake could lead to a team wipe. Fortunately, the Hell Legion's members were extraordinarily strong, and there were 300 of them. They could venture through the inner region in relative safety, although their progress was incredibly slow. After more than 10 hours of travel, Shi Feng and his team reached the inner region's boundary. They could see a gigantic mountain not far from their position on the inner region's border. The mountain's aura felt boundless, and those who approached could feel their bodies grow heavier. The closer one got to the base of the mountain, the stronger the sensation became. This was none other than Star Valley's God Mode regional dungeon, the Star Tomb. Consider this carefully, Guild Leader Black Flame. Do you really want to go in there? Once we're inside, leaving will be a challenge, and if players die, they won't resurrect outside of the dungeon. Hell Rush warned Shi Feng as he stared at the mountain before them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Star Tomb was a very special location. When players normally died, they'd resurrect in the nearest NPC town or city, but that wasn't the case in the Star Tomb. No matter how many times players died, they'd only return to life within the dungeon. I understand. Let's head in. Shi Feng was quite familiar with the Star Tomb's peculiarities, yet he walked into the regional dungeon with no hesitation. Hell Legion's members only glanced at each other before helplessly following the swordsman. Shortly after Shi Feng and his team entered the Star Tomb, the Starlight Fortress in Star Valley's outer region lit with a bright glow as the seal was finally removed. The Starlight Fortress had opened to the public. Chapter 2481, Fortress of Astronomical Value. Quick, look. The Starlight Fortress is open. It's finally open. I've been waiting for this moment. The various superpowers and independent players in the nearby forest immediately noticed the dazzling glow that enveloped the Starlight Fortress. They had been waiting for the fortress to open to the public, especially the independent players. They all had great expectations. Independent players were unaware of Netherworld Empire's agreement, but some of Divine Tribe's members had leaked information about the situation within the Starlight Fortress. When they finally got to see the fortress's many benefits, the various independent players caused an uproar. Aside from the fortress's mana-dense environment, which would help them quickly recover from exhaustion, the fact that they could improve their mana control just by visiting the fortress made it far more impressive than any NPC city on the Western continent. Furthermore, the Starlight Fortress was located within Star Valley. Now that they could enter the fortress, they could grind in the Forbidden Land, boosting their leveling speed and resource acquisition. Naturally, they couldn't miss the opportunity to set up a base of operations within the Starlight Fortress. Although the various superpowers had dispatched many of their players, they were no match for the number of independent players eagerly waiting to enter the fortress. The independent players who had been resting in the forest charged toward the Starlight Fortress like a flood of madmen. Despite their imposing might, not even the various superpowers experts reached the fortress before the tide of independent players. However, the scene didn't enrage the superpowers, they were actually overjoyed to see it. I hadn't expected to find so many Tier 3 experts in the area. I doubt Netherworld Empire and Divine Tribe expected so many players, either. This is going to be interesting. Even Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion would be helpless against so many Tier 3 experts. When the various superpowers' upper echelons saw the independent players swarm toward the Starlight Fortress, excitement flashed in their eyes. They had begun to believe that they had no hope of causing chaos within the fortress. After all, Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion was not just for decoration. They hadn't expected a situation like this, and they had never imagined that independent players would be so interested in the Starlight Fortress. There were already more than 5,000 Tier 3 independent players, not to mention the Tier 2 players. There were more of them than those in the various superpowers combined. Even if Netherworld Empire went all out, they had no hope of defending the fortress against such a force, let alone Divine Tribe. Before the superpowers' upper echelons could celebrate, however, a dragon with silver scales flew out of the Starlight Fortress and landed beside the front gate, quietly observing the approaching horde of independent players. The excited independent players froze on the spot when they saw Auerbach. None of them dared to move. The sudden development even stupefied the various superpowers watching from afar. They were talking about 5,000 Tier 3 experts. And yet, every one of them acted like a mouse before a cat. Of course, the various superpowers experts could sympathize. Auerbach's aura was just that frightening. Even from far away, they felt as if the weight of a mountain had rested on their shoulders. Needless to say, the independent players who were much closer to the Silver Divine Dragon felt an even stronger pressure. Is that really just a Tier 4 dragon? The various superpowers experts were at a loss for words as they stared at Auerbach. They had realized that Auerbach was exceptionally strong after the Hell Legion had fled from it, but seeing the Divine Dragon in person, they understood how mistaken they had been. This was not a matter of strength. No one should be so foolish as to provoke Auerbach. The Starlight Fortress is now open to the public. If you wish to enter the fortress, listen carefully. All combat is prohibited within the fortress walls. Not only will you be slain if you break this rule, but you'll also be imprisoned for 8 days in the fortress prison, McCaffrey, who stood on the wall above the main gate, announced as he gazed at the players below. If nobody has any questions, you may register to enter the fortress. As McCaffrey finished his statement, the nearby players' expressions changed. The announcement dumbfounded the various superpowers members in particular. Fortress prison? What is he talking about? The superpowers upper echelons, who had laughed at the Starlight Fortress's latest predicament, could no longer muster the strength to laugh. They were familiar with the concept of God's domain's prisons. Once players were jailed, they'd have to serve their time unless someone destroyed the prison from the outside. It was this moment when the various superpowers understood, more or less, why Netherworld Empire had decided to compromise. With a fortress prison around, who would dare cause a scene in the fortress? The various superpowers began to despair when McCaffrey began to speak once more. Due to the fortress's limited space, players may only remain inside for 1 natural day. Each consecutive day you spend in the fortress will cost 1 magic crystal. In addition, all basic services the fortress offers cost magic crystals. If you fail to pay for the services you've requested, you will also spend 8 days in the prison. Please keep this in mind during your stay. After listening to McCaffrey's speech, every player in the area was stunned again. Normally, the various powers did everything they could to increase a fortress's player population after capturing one, which in turn would transform the fortress into a trade hub. This would also give the ruling power access to a huge amount of resources, yet the Starlight Fortress's owner had decided against that. They showed no regard for attracting players to the fortress. The entrance fee alone cost a whopping 20 silver per person, and players were only allowed to spend a day in the fortress. Once that day was up, every additional day would cost a magic crystal. To make matters worse, they had to pay magic crystals for the services within the fortress. This was basically daylight robbery. Only a fool would enter the fortress. On the Western continent, magic crystals were incredibly rare, which made them far more valuable than coins. Moreover, most high-value transactions involved magic crystals. Tier 2 experts would be fortunate to earn 3 or 4 magic crystals per day, and Tier 3 experts only earned around a dozen. After deducting daily expenses, they'd be lucky if they kept half of their remaining magic crystals. With how the Starlight Fortress operated, Tier 2 experts had no hope of setting up a base within the fortress. Are the fortress's managers insane? Their greed for magic crystals certainly is. It's already obvious that no one on the continent has a chance of taking the fortress. The fortress can slowly develop and grow without worry, and yet they're chasing people away. I can't wait to see how they'll survive against the demonic creature armies. The situation even stunned the various superpowers. They couldn't fathom what Shi Feng and the others were thinking. If they had so many magic crystals to spare, they might as well spend them in the Divine Colosseum's trial tower. Moreover, players could afford a luxury meal, which would help them recover from exhaustion far faster than within a mana-dense environment, with 20 silver to spend. In truth, the pricing had left McCaffrey speechless when he had heard it, but Shi Feng had insisted that the fortress would only conduct business using magic crystals. So he couldn't do anything about it. The Starlight Fortress belonged entirely to Zero Wing after all. Divine Tribe was only helping manage it. While some powers and players left in a huff, a 500-man team watched the events unfold from a short distance away from the main gate. "Are we still going in, Commander?" a ruthless level 106 man asked the robust man in leather armor next to him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The robust man was Crow, the Stormheart Adventurer team's commander. "Of course. We might as well take a look since we're here," Crow said, gritting his teeth. The 20 silver entrance fee wasn't a major concern for Stormheart, but the fact that the fortress's basic amenities cost magic crystals wasn't something Stormheart could afford to play with. But Crow's curiosity was too strong to ignore. Thus he decided to go in and look around. At worst, they'd have paid the entrance fee for nothing. Having given his answer, Crow led his team toward the Starlight Fortress's front gate. Chapter 2482 Mana changes. Once Stormheart's members paid the exorbitant entrance fee, they carefully walked through the front gate under Auerbach's watchful eye. What? Some players are actually willing to pay such a fraudulent fee? Maybe they've decided to do some sightseeing since they've already gone to the effort of reaching the fortress. The players that had been preparing to leave the area watched Crow and his team with contempt as they entered the Starlight Fortress. A 20 silver entrance fee was unheard of on the Western continent. With 20 silver, a player could fully repair their weapons and equipment in an NPC city. Some Tier 2 players only made that much after a full day of grinding. Yet, Stormheart's members were investing so much money just to sightsee or experience the fortress's mana-dense environment. Moreover, they could only spend one day in the fortress. They were foolish to waste their money like that. After spending a moment to ridicule Stormheart, the surrounding players packed up and left. It wasn't long before 90% of the players around the Starlight Fortress left the area. Now, less than 10,000 players remained in line at the front gate. They've already secured their hold on the Starlight Fortress, yet they're chasing away customers. We won't have to lift a finger to ensure the fortress's demise. They want to charge magic crystals for all basic expenditures made inside the fortress? They certainly know how to dream. How foolish. Do they really think they can squeeze players for all they've got just because the Starlight Fortress is the only open fortress in Star Valley? The various superpowers' upper echelons couldn't help but laugh when they saw how few players were willing to enter the Starlight Fortress. They had been afraid that the fortress would make some bold move to widen the gap between them, but it seemed their concerns had been meaningless. 20 silver to enter a fortress was a high price to pay, but many expert players could tolerate the cost. With the resources available in Star Valley and the Starlight Fortress's benefits, they could easily earn back the coins and more. However, the Starlight Fortress had crossed the line by charging magic crystals for its basic services. On the Western continent, magic crystals were players' foundation. Without magic crystals for their combat runes, players' combat power would decrease significantly. Unfortunately, as luck would have it, magic crystals were painfully rare in the West. Obtaining a single magic crystal was a challenge. If it weren't so difficult, the continent's various powers wouldn't fight so desperately over or veins that had a chance of producing magic crystals. Although players could obtain magic crystals by grinding in Star Valley, it wasn't easy. Star Valley was still a level 100 plus forbidden land and far more dangerous than other maps where magic crystals dropped. If a player decided to focus their development around the fortress, they'd only be cheap labor for the ruling power. Only a fool would accept that burden. Following which, the various superpowers' upper echelons commanded their teams to turn around and leave. They had no intention of entering the Starlight Fortress. They had learned of the fortress's situation from the spies they had planted in Divine Tribe before the Starlight Fortress had opened to the public. They had no reason to enter the fortress to verify the reports. They'd only be handing over their hard-earned coins by doing so. McCaffrey felt frustrated as he watched so many players walk away from his position on the fortress's wall. Those players were potential money and resources. Shi Feng could have easily transformed the Starlight Fortress into a prosperous trade hub by lowering his prices, yet he had insisted on charging magic crystals for all basic services. That condition alone had deterred the majority of players from visiting the fortress. While the various superpowers walked away from the Starlight Fortress, the Stormheart Adventurer team had made it inside. So, this is the Starlight Fortress? The mana density is so high. It's no wonder why the entrance fee is so exorbitant. This environment is certainly worth the price. Stormheart's members were mesmerized when they sensed the ambient mana within the Starlight Fortress. They were not members of the various superpowers, just independent players. Even if they were a part of a top adventurer team, they could only get their hands on limited resources. The resources Stormheart possessed couldn't even compare to that of first-rate guilds. Needless to say, they didn't have access to mana-abundant locations either. They had to rely on their exceptional talent and hard work to develop slowly. We'll only be able to rest here from time to time. We can't afford to go bankrupt, the ruthless man beside Crow said as he glanced at the pricing boards outside the nearby hotels. Even in NPC kingdoms and Empire's capital cities, the most expensive, luxurious hotel room only cost 10 silver per night. However, not only were the hotel rooms in the Starlight Fortress small, but they were also astonishingly expensive. A room actually cost 1 magic crystal per night. Their team currently had 500 players. If they rented hotel rooms for the night, they'd have to pay a total of 500 magic crystals. The rest of Stormheart's members could only nod in agreement. Not even first-rate guilds could afford such a costly expenditure, let alone Stormheart. Only superpowers would have the funds to rent these hotel rooms. Wait. The mana here is different somehow, a Tier 3 female elementalist suddenly spoke up. Different? Curious, the ruthless man began to pay more attention to the mana around him, but he failed to find anything unusual about it. How is it different? No. She's right. Crow exclaimed. To be precise, this area has different types of elemental mana. I can sense the 3 supreme elements, and the mana is growing even denser, the female elementalist explained. Ordinary Tier 3 experts would likely struggle to sense the differences in the ambient mana, but she had a special mana legacy, which allowed her to notice the minute oddity. The 3 supreme elements? The ruthless man was stunned. Excitedly he asked, doesn't that mean that this fortress's environment is similar to the environment of ancient times? Experts constantly researched and tried to understand more about God's domain's current affairs and history every day. The information hid many opportunities, and for independent players and adventurer teams who lacked resources, this was one of the few reliable ways to encounter fortuitous opportunities. Naturally, Stormheart and its members were no exception. In fact, their knowledge of God's domain was vast, especially regarding the ancient area when gods had still roamed the land. The ancient era had been the peak of God's domain. Humankind had been far more powerful then. Ancient human civilizations had developed their individual strength and technology to unbelievable levels. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In comparison, current humans hit their limit after reaching Tier 5. Moreover, most Tier 5 powerhouses nowadays were far weaker than those of the past. The biggest difference between the past and the present was the composition of ambient mana. During ancient times, ambient mana had been composed of all 7 elements, but now, it only included the 4 major elements. The remaining 3 supreme elements could only be found in certain locations and in almost negligible amounts. This was why God's domain's creatures couldn't fully comprehend and control mana, which made it harder to reach new tiers. And yet, within the Starlight Fortress, the 3 supreme elements had gathered, creating an environment reminiscent of ancient times. This was a heaven-defying opportunity. Chapter 2483, Hidden Madness. As soon as the ruthless man finished speaking, excitement flashed in his Tier 3 comrade's eyes. If the Starlight Fortress's environment were reminiscent of ancient times, consisting of all 7 elements, it would be a true paradise for players. Not only would players have a much easier time controlling mana in such an environment, but it would also help them unlock their mana bodies. After giving the matter some thought, Crow turned to the Tier 3 female elementalist beside him and said, Rose, return to headquarters and gather all of the magic crystals we have. Send someone to ask around about renting a hotel here as well. We'll be using it as Stormheart's temporary base. From now on, Stormheart's Tier 3 members will develop out of the Starlight Fortress. Although living in the Starlight Fortress was costly, if the benefits allowed one to improve their mana control and unlock their mana body's potential with ease, it was worth the price. It would even be worthwhile if the adventurer team had to invest every magic crystal it had earned thus far and would earn in the future. Levels weren't the top priority for Tier 3 players right now. Rather, unlocking their mana body's full potential was far more important. A Tier 3 player could only exhibit the true strength of Tier 3 once they did so. Residing in the Starlight Fortress would accelerate the process of unlocking their mana bodies, which was a unique, massive benefit. The rest of God's Domain's players hadn't realized this yet, which gave Stormheart the opportunity to establish a base in the fortress. If they waited until the various guilds noticed, finding a place and developing in the Starlight Fortress would become far more difficult for the adventurer team. In terms of money and resources, Stormheart wasn't even a match for first-rate guilds, much less superpowers. Understood. I'll have someone look into it immediately. The female elementalist in blue, Ice Rose, replied before breaking away from the rest of the group. While Stormheart secretly took action, other Tier 3 independent players, who had entered the fortress and were particularly sensitive to mana, did the same. For a time, something strange took place within the nearly empty Starlight Fortress. Despite barely any players visiting the fortress, its hotels were booked, one after another. Moreover, all of the rooms were rented long-term, stunning the ignorant visiting players in McCaffrey. Players could earn a 10% discount when renting hotel rooms long-term, but they'd have to reserve the room for a minimum of 10 days. This meant that players had to pay 9 magic crystals per room, with each day normally costing 1 magic crystal. Including the fact that all of the fortress's basic amenities cost magic crystals, the cost was even extravagant to Tier 3 experts. Regardless, nearly 100 players had rented rooms in the Starlight Fortress long-term. Some players had even rented out an entire hotel. As a result, the fortress had earned nearly 5,000 magic crystals in less than an hour after its grand opening, and the crystals continued to roll in. Meanwhile, inside the Star Tomb, Shi Feng and his team ventured farther into the Star Tomb, and the Hell Legion faced one bitter battle after another. Even Tier 3 experts struggled to move within the regional dungeon, their mobility reduced to that of Tier 1 players. Fortunately, their basic attributes hadn't been affected. The reduced mobility had, however, considerably limited everyone's individual combat power. In the outside world, every member of the Hell Legion could solo a level 105 Great Lord, but in the Star Tomb they could barely defeat a level 105 High Lord. The Earthen giants in the regional dungeon's outer region typically moved in groups consisting of several hundred, with each having at least 100 Great Lords. These small armies were an extraordinary challenge for the Hell Legion. Every time they encountered a group of monsters, the Legion spent over an hour to defeat them, and once the battle was over they had to retrieve their tents to recover their lost stamina. If they didn't take the time to rest, their chances of defeating the next monster army would plummet. Naturally, this slowed their leveling speed to a crawl. However, the Hell Legion members had to admit that the God Mode regional dungeon was a wonderful location. Not only was the monsters' drop rate impressive, but the loot they acquired was top quality as well. One would have to slay Grand Lords for the slightest chance of obtaining secret silver weapons and equipment in the outside world, but in the Star Tomb they could slay Great Lords to acquire the same ranked items. Furthermore, the dungeon's Great Lords had a chance of dropping level 105 secret silver set equipment. After over 20 hours of battle in the Star Tomb, the Hell Legion had completed 2 secret blue sets and 1 thorn set. The secret blue set was a set equipment for magical classes, while the thorn set catered to plate armor classes. Although both were only 6-piece, level 105 secret silver set equipment, they were definitely considered top tier in an era when most guild experts hadn't yet reached level 105, even the Hell Legion's members coveted the set equipment. Although the weakest piece of equipment among them was level 105 secret silver rank, with a few players having level 105 fine gold and dark gold equipment, the benefits of a complete secret silver set equipment were slightly greater than the items they currently wore. If they were willing to part with the set equipment, they could easily demand astronomical prices. Star Tomb's monsters also dropped plenty of magic crystals and mana stones. The Legion had even acquired 3 combat techniques and Tier 2 skill books. Unfortunately, the Hell Legion had entered an agreement with Shi Feng before they had entered the regional dungeon. Since Shi Feng had employed the Legion for this expedition, all loot they acquired would belong to him. The Hell Legion would only gain EXP within the dungeon. Guild leader Black Flame, "We found the path to the Star Tomb's 2nd floor ahead," Hell Rush reported, gesturing to a massive tunnel not far from the team. The monsters in the area are too concentrated, however, and there are a few Grand Lords in the mix. Pushing past them is impossible. I'm afraid we'll be limited to this area. The Star Tomb's interior had a similar structure to a tower, separated into multiple floors. Each floor was the size of a level 15 map, and the outside world was more difficult to clear than the last. As players ascended, they'd also be subjected to higher gravitational force. None of the various superpowers had made it past the central area of the Star Tomb's 1st floor, near the passage to the 2nd. Reaching the 2nd floor proved almost impossible for current players. To make matters worse, players couldn't use summoning tools or war weapons in the Star Tomb. They couldn't even activate their berserk skills. Combined with the intense gravitational force, the Hell Legion was limited to taking on a few dozen Great Lords and a Grand Lord at a time. If the Legion tried to take on 3 or 4 Grand Lords at once, they'd be eliminated. They wouldn't even have the chance to flee. With their suppressed movement speed, they were considerably slower than the Earthen giants. Their only option for survival was to slay the monsters. "That won't do. Our goal is on the Star Tomb's 2nd floor," Shi Feng said, shaking his head. The Star Tomb had a total of 11 floors, and the first couldn't even be considered the outer region's outer area. They'd barely make it to the dungeon's outer region once they made it to the 2nd floor, and they'd only have a chance of securing a Star of Light by slaying the monsters in that area. "It's not that we don't want to reach the 2nd floor," Guild leader Black Flame, "we just can't make it that far. If we start a fight near the tunnel, we'll attract all of the Earthen giants in the area. Not only will we have to face nearly 1,000 Earthen giants, but there are also 5 Grand Lords. We're no match for them with our current combat power," Hell Rush explained. The various superpowers had tried to reach the 2nd floor as well, but even after trying various methods, none had succeeded. The 5 Grand Lords were especially challenging. Even a 1,000-man Tier 3 team would struggle to defeat them, much less 300 Tier 3 experts. Rest assured, Commander Rush. I can't make any promises regarding the rest of the Earthen Giants, but you can leave the Grand Lords to us, Shi Feng said, chuckling as he gave the 8-meter-tall Earthen Giants an anticipatory look. You'll deal with them? Hell Rush swept his gaze across Shi Feng and his companions. Their team only included 10 of Zero Wing's members, and although he hadn't seen these players fight yet, he recognized that they all had extraordinary combat power. If these 10 players worked together, they might be able to take on a Grand Lord-ranked Earthen Giant by themselves. Unfortunately, 5 Grand Lords guarded the passage ahead. No matter how Hell Rush thought about the idea, it seemed like a joke. That's right. Do you think you and your legion can take out the rest of the monsters? Shi Feng asked, nodding. If you can stop the Grand Lords, the rest won't be a problem, Hell Rush said, flashing a confident grin. But, are you sure that you can defeat the 5 Grand Lords? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Don't worry about them. Shi Feng then turned to Yan Tianxing and the others and asked, you guys can deal with the Grand Lords, right? No problem. Leave it to us. After watching the Hell Legion, we've been itching for a fight, Yan Tianxing replied with a wide smile. Alright, let's lure the 5 monsters away from the rest of the group first then, Shi Feng decided. 5 of his companions then walked away before charging at the 5 Grand Lords guarding the tunnel. They're just going to do it? Are they insane? Watching Yan Tianxing and the others rush ahead without waiting for the Hell Legion, Hell Rush was dumbfounded. Chapter 2484, Unlocked Mana Body. Hell Rush wasn't the only one dumbfounded. The rest of Hell Legion's resting members were stunned as they watched the 5 Zero Wing members charge toward the Grand Lords. There were nearly 1,000 Earthen Giants near the passage, and the weakest was a level 109 High Lord. There were over 100 Great Lords as well, and if they surrounded a 100-man Tier 3 team, the players would be done for. The Earthen Giants weren't affected by the Star Tomb's gravitational force, and thus, both their movement and attack speeds were higher than Tier 3 players. As a result, players had to rely on their basic attributes to block the Earthen Giants' attacks and their techniques to minimize the damage. The Hell Legion could only take on 3 or 4 Earthen Giants at one time. Even if they had superior combat standards, they wouldn't be able to face a larger group and emerge from the battle unscathed. Yet, Yan Tianxing and his 4 comrades charged towards so many of these monsters with no hesitation. Just as Hell Rush came to his senses and turned to tell Shi Feng to stop his players, what he saw next left him flabbergasted. Yan Tianxing, Fire Dance, Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud, and Yi Luofei were simply too fast. Despite the Star Tomb's painful gravitational force, those 5 players closed the distance of several hundred yards in 5 seconds, reaching the monsters guarding the tunnel. Impossible. How are they so fast? Did they find a bug? All of the Hell Legion's members were surprised and confused by Yan Tianxing and his party's movement speed. Even with superior basic attributes, attaining such speed in this environment should be impossible. The increased gravitational force had a massive impact on players' speed. Even if a Tier 2 player had double or triple their basic attributes, the Star Tomb's gravitational force wasn't something that could simply be overcome. The Hell Legion's members even suspected that reaching Tier 4 would only boost their speed to the Tier 2 standard. And yet, Yan Tianxing's group moved as easily as they did outside of the regional dungeon. It was unbelievable. Wait, why is the mana around them so dense? Hell Rush watched Yan Tianxing's group carefully for a moment, and a thought popped in his mind. Could they have already unlocked their mana bodies? Even as he wondered if it were possible, he found the idea laughable. Most of the various superpowers experts hadn't even begun to unlock their mana bodies, much less to their full potential. The Hell Legion member who had progressed the furthest had only unlocked 20% of their mana body. They still had a long road ahead to reach 100%. They'd likely need 1 or 2, perhaps even 4 or 5, months to accomplish the task. One couldn't simply unlock their mana body's full potential overnight. Players would have to continuously try to understand and control their mana bodies, starting the process from the very beginning. Hence, it was a long and arduous process. However, the mana surrounding Yan Tianxing's group was so strong that it puzzled Hell Rush. Thus far, Yan Tianxing and the others hadn't participated in any of their battles, so Hell Rush hadn't noticed anything different about the mana around them. He had assumed that they used some special weapon or equipment piece that made the mana around them so dense. Now that these players were on the move, however, the mana around them grew denser, and it wasn't a result of attracting ambient mana. Rather, this mana felt as if it originated from the players. Before Hell Rush could shake the thought, however, Yan Tianxing and his companions reached their targets. Earthen Chieftain, Elemental Creature, Grand Lord, Level 112 HP 330, 000/330, 000. An Earthen Chieftain was already an incredibly tough monster in the outside world. Elemental creatures had high magic resistance after all, and the Earthen Chieftain's body was composed of solid stone, which gave it a defense that could rival inferior dragons. There was also the fact that the Earthen Chieftain's HPs were so high. A 100-man team with 30 Tier 3 players would struggle to raid an Earthen Chieftain in the outside world at this stage of the game, and every team of that caliber was considered first-rate in God's domain. Ordinary powers didn't even have enough experts to form such a team. The instant Fire Dance reached her Earthen Chieftain, the Grand Lord, which had long since detected the assassin, raised its fist and slammed it down on her. The Earthen Chieftain was 8 meters tall, and its fists were as massive as boulders. Watching its fist descend toward Fire Dance was like watching a small mountain fall on her. There was no way she could dodge the attack, she'd have to block it. Finally, I can test my mana body's strength properly. A hint of excitement flashed in Fire Dance's eyes as the Grand Lord's fist fell. She immediately unsheathed 1,000 transformations, countering the Earthen Chieftain's attack with a normal strike. When she had emerged from the Legacy Gate, she had only been a small step away from unlocking her mana body's full potential, and after using the Legacy Room she had resolved that issue. She had spent some time experimenting with her mana body, finally unlocking its potential to 100% a day ago. However, she had been busy with the Starlight Fortress's matters and hadn't had time to test out her mana body. Now that she had the perfect opportunity to so, she wouldn't waste it by relying on her more powerful skills. Is she insane? She's only an assassin, yet she's trying to tough it out? The Hell Legion's members thought Fire Dance was overestimating her strength when she hadn't used a skill to dodge the Grand Lord's attack. With her speed, evading the blow shouldn't be hard. She was a Void Realm expert after all. She should have recognized the Earthen Chieftain's attack trajectory immediately. And yet, the assassin was trying to counter the Earthen Chieftain's blow. She had to be suicidal. Boom. The sound of an explosion echoed throughout the area, and the ground trembled. The impact's shockwave threw dust into the air. Once the dust settled, the scene before the Hell Legion's members stunned them. She blocked it. An assassin, a class known for its speed, had successfully blocked the Earthen Chieftain's attack. Crap. She actually blocked it? Is she really an assassin? The Hell Legion members felt their worldview crumble when Fire Dance had emerged from the exchange without injury. Not even Thunder Beast, who had the highest strength of any Hell Legion member, would be a match for a monster like the Earthen Chieftain. He'd have to rely on the Legion's healers to tank the Grand Lord. And yet, Fire Dance had countered the attack without taking any damage. Sure enough, an unlocked peak gold mana body is amazing. Even a normal attack is so powerful. If she can learn a mana technique, she'll likely be able to solo mythics. When Shi Feng saw Fire Dance dominate the Earthen Chieftain, he couldn't help his desire to unlock his own mana body. God's Domain's players would only be considered true experts once they had unlocked their mana body's full potential. If they didn't, they'd only be considered pseudo-experts, even after reaching Tier 4. Take the Star Tomb for example. If players entered the dungeon without fully unlocking their mana bodies, they'd struggle against the regional dungeon's suppression. Hence, the first thing all experts needed to do upon reaching Tier 3 was unlock their mana bodies. Levels and tiers had to be set aside. Until they succeeded, they wouldn't even qualify to explore God's domain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. While Shi Feng admired Fire Dance's display, the assassin used shadow steps to appear behind the Earthen Chieftain. It's my turn. Fire Dance raised 1,000 transformations, aiming for the back of the Grand Lord's head. Absolute strike. Darkness immediately surrounded Fire Dance. Minus 424,538. A damage of over minus 400,000 appeared above the Earthen Chieftain's head, and silence fell over the Hell Legion. Chapter 2485, Inhuman Battle, over 400,000 damage. Is she even human? Every member of the Hell Legion wondered if they were hallucinating when they saw the bright red numbers above the Earthen Chieftain's head. For a moment they even wondered if Fire Dance was an NPC disguised as a player. Even they, experts who stood at the pinnacle of God's domain, could barely cause over minus 70,000 damage to the Earthen Giants with Tier 3 skills and spells. Hell Rush, one of the Legion's strongest players, could only deal around minus 150,000. These monsters' ridiculously high defense and magic resistance could practically rival archaic species of the same rank. And yet, they had just watched a Tier 3 assassin deal over minus 400,000 damage to the Grand Lord ranked Earthen Chieftain, and she had only used a Tier 2 skill. Even at Tier 3, assassins didn't have many options for raising their attack's power. Most of their skills focused on speed, increasing their total DPS. But Fire Dance had obliterated what they had known about the class. How could she even be considered an assassin with that kind of raw power? She was even more of a berserker than actual berserkers. Before the Hell Legion members could recover from their shock, Yan Tianxing and the other 3 Zero-Wing experts started their battles with their own Earthen Chieftains. Yan Tianxing effortlessly evaded his Grand Lord's straightforward attack, circling to the Grand Lord's back. He then brandished his daggers and sent several beautiful silver arcs slicing into the Earthen Chieftain's back. Minus 134,324. Minus 274,543. Minus 133,645. A series of damages appeared above the Earthen Chieftain's head, and although each of his hits didn't deal as much damage as Fire Dance's, the total amount was frightening. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud, and Yi Luofei, all magical class players, caused an even greater commotion. As soon as Aqua Rose finished her spell's incantation, a towering tidal wave manifested before her, devouring the Earthen Chieftain and several dozen Earthen Giants nearby. In one move, Aqua Rose heavily injured the Earthen Giants and Earthen Chieftain, which boasted high magic resistance. She also dealt over 1 million damage to each of them. Meanwhile, Yi Luofei summoned 5 flaming meteors, casting them down on her Earthen Chieftain. 3 meteors. As each meteor struck the ground, the dungeon's first floor trembled violently. By the time all 5 had landed, they had created a crater that was over 100 meters wide and 10 meters deep around the Grand Lord. Of the 3 Earthen Chieftains that faced these magical class players, however, Violet Cloud's target was in the worst state. 300 shadow blades danced around the Grand Lord, each with enough force to make the monster stumble. When all 300 attacked as one, the outcome could only be described as a tragedy. How does Zero Wing have so many monstrous players? At this point, every member of the Hell Legion believed that Yan Tianxing's party could slay the 5 Earthen Chieftains, let alone keep them distracted. They only might need some time to defeat the monsters. Even so, their combat power was astonishing. The 5 Zero-Wing experts single-handedly suppressed the Star Tomb's Grand Lords, and not one of them was an MT. Guild leader Black Flame, have they fully unlocked their mana bodies? Hell Rush could not help but ask as he watched Fire Dance and the others fight. He couldn't think of any other reason that would allow those 5 players to display such incredible speed and power. Not even the various Super Guilds experts had unlocked their mana bodies' full potential. All of them were still exploring. It hadn't been long since these experts had reached Tier 3 after all. They have. All 5 have reached 100% of their mana body's potential, Shi Feng confirmed with a nod. He had no intention of hiding the fact, nor could he. He couldn't explain away the strength Yan Tianxing and the other 4 displayed as higher basic attributes. Even if they had double or triple their basic attributes, they wouldn't exhibit such impressive combat power. Players could only accomplish this feat by unlocking their mana body's full potential. It was a pity that Shadow Sword, Cola, Turtledove, and Alluring Summer hadn't progressed this far yet. Even Alluring Summer had only unlocked 98% of her potential. If she had been able to bridge that final gap, their team would have had a much easier time exploring the Star Tomb. All 5 of them have fully unlocked their mana bodies? Hell Rush and the vice commanders around him gasped when they heard Shi Feng's answer. They had suspected this might be the case, but they couldn't help their astonishment when Shi Feng had confirmed it. Even the strongest player in Netherworld Empire had only unlocked 20% of their mana body's potential. They'd still need another month or 2 to reach 100%. They would still need at least 1 or 2 months to reach 100% potential. Yet, Zero Wing, a guild that had started from nothing in God's domain and wasn't supported by any major corporation, had nurtured 5 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies. It was unbelievable. Would you be willing to offer some guidance regarding mana bodies, guild leader Black Flame? If you are, I can represent my guild in offering to garrison 50,000 experts in the Starlight Fortress long-term. Netherworld Empire will also supply Zero Wing with various rare materials from the Western continent, Hell Rush proposed, trying to contain his excitement. Everyone's mana body was different, and players would gain very little from others' experiences, but the fact that Zero Wing had nurtured 5 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies proved that it could help players accomplish the feat. Anyone that said otherwise was either lying or a fool. Players would see huge differences in their accomplishments, depending on how soon they unlocked their mana body's potential. The difference between the combat power Zero Wing's members displayed and that of the Hell Legion made that much obvious. After Hell Rush presented his offer and request, the rest of his comrades grew restless, watching Shi Feng. They all wanted to hear his answer. Before this, they hadn't realized how effective a fully unlocked mana body would be on one's combat power, but after seeing Yin Tianxing and his companions' performance, they were sure of one thing. Tier 3 players that hadn't unlocked their mana bodies were pests in comparison. Many of the Hell Legion's members had just as high combat standards as Fire Dance and the others, but if they had to fight any of those 5 players, they'd refuse. The difference between their overall combat power was like the difference between heaven and earth. They even suspected that Fire Dance and her party could take on 30 Hell Legion members simultaneously. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The more Hell Legion's experts thought about it, the more restless they became. Rather than their earlier prideful attitude, they all watched Shi Feng with anticipation and hunger. Weapons and equipment were secondary concerns for experts like them. Their individual strength was far more important. In fact, they had joined their guild in the pursuit of greater strength. Don't worry about the 50,000 experts, Shi Feng dismissed the offer. He could not help but shake his head and chuckle when he saw everyone's eager looks. Offering guidance for unlocking your mana bodies isn't necessarily impossible, but in exchange, I'd like Netherworld Empire to help me with another matter. In exchange, I will offer some advice. Although I cannot help all of you unlock your mana body's full potential in a short time, I can help you complete the task with a little more speed. Hell Rush had to calm his heart again when Shi Feng had agreed. He responded immediately, Guild Leader Black Flame, please state your demands. If I have the authority to agree to them, I can do so on my guild's behalf. It's very simple. I need 1 month. I want Hell Legion under my command for 1 full month. Shi Feng raised a finger and swept his gaze across the Hell Legion members. Chapter 2486, Earthen Chieftains Loot. When Shi Feng finished speaking, Hell Rush and the others revealed astonished expressions on their faces. You want to employ us for a month? Hell Rush could not help hesitating upon hearing Shi Feng's demand. Had the swordsman asked for financial assistance, he could have easily approved the request with his authority. However, hiring the entire Hell Legion for 1 whole month was a different story. The Hell Legion was one of Netherworld Empire's trump card legions. The Legion's first priority was the improvement of its members' strength and level, which was why the guild would invest tons of resources in the Legion. It might be fine if Shi Feng wished to employ the Hell Legion for 1 or 2 days, but an employment period of 1 whole month was something else altogether. A month might not be particularly long, but it wasn't particularly short either. Netherworld Empire might be willing to use money and resources to exchange for the improvement of its members' combat power, but not a large amount of its trump card Legion's time. After all, the reason behind Netherworld's considerable investment of resources in the development of its members was to buy time for itself. To be precise, it was to save time and gain an advantage over their competitors. Selling the time of one of its trump card legions would be akin to putting the cart before the horse. Moreover, the Hell Legion had plenty of tasks it needed to handle. If it operated under Shi Feng for a month, these tasks would have to be set aside. You can rest assured that during this 1 month, your level won't fall behind others in the slightest. In fact, your equipment standard won't fall behind either. You'll also be free to do whatever you want for most of this 1 month. I will only need your help during certain times, Shi Feng said, chuckling when he saw the hesitation on Hell Rush's face. Most importantly, you will get to receive guidance on how to unlock your mana bodies ahead of everyone else. I can guarantee that all of you will unlock your mana bodies within this 1 month. Shi Feng understood Hell Rush's concerns. After all, the Hell Legion was Netherworld Empire's strongest trump card legion. Although the Great Super Guild invested the best resources it had in the Legion, that did not mean the Legion would automatically grow stronger. The Legion still had to cherish every second available to improve itself so that it could compete and surpass the teams and legions of other superpowers. No guild would be willing to let its strongest legion waste 1 whole month working for someone else, even in exchange for the method to accelerate the process of unlocking one's mana body. I'm afraid I don't have the authority to decide on this matter. I need to report this to my superiors first and leave the decision to them, Hell Rush said. Although Shi Feng's words were tempting, he still shook his head and did not give a definitive answer. The Hell Legion was Netherworld Empire's trump card legion. The resources Netherworld Empire could obtain and invest in the Hell Legion were not something Shi Feng could possibly get his hands on. Moreover, Netherworld Empire might not have any methods to accelerate the unlocking process of a player's mana body now, but that might not be the case a few days later. If the Great Super Guild happened to come across such a method soon after signing a contract with Shi Feng, the Hell Legion would waste 1 month of its time for nothing. With the Hell Legion's capabilities, the opportunities it stood to lose out on from 1 month's idleness were massive. Alright. I'm not in a hurry to settle this deal. You can think it over once you return, Shi Feng said, not the slightest bit surprised by Hell Rush's reply. After all, this was no longer a decision Hell Rush could make as the Hell Legion's commander. Only Netherworld Empire's guild leader and grand elders could. Thank you for your understanding, guild leader Black Flame. We will give you a reply as soon as possible, Hell Rush said, nodding. Inwardly though, he felt that the likelihood of his higher-ups approving this transaction was minimal. After all, a month was simply too long, especially with the number of Tier 3 players in God's domain rapidly increasing. Meanwhile, Kola, who had overheard the conversation, looked at Shi Feng in confusion. Guild leader, are you really planning to let them enter the Legacy Gate? Kola asked in a quiet tone, a pained expression appearing on his face. Kola had personally experienced the Legacy Gate's benefits. It was undoubtedly the best place to improve one's mana body. However, the number of slots to enter the Legacy Gate each month were limited. Zero Wing barely had enough for itself. He felt that giving the slots to Netherworld Empire would be a huge waste. After all, a Tier 3 expert with a fully unlocked mana body brought plenty of advantages. Moreover, letting the Hell Legion use the Legacy Gate would expose the Starlight Fortress's true value. Although the Hell Legion indeed possessed a lot of Tier 3 experts, Zero Wing wasn't weak either. Zero Wing might not be capable of producing 300 Tier 3 experts in the next 10 or 15 days, but producing up to 200 Tier 3 experts should be no problem. By then, Zero Wing should also have a few more experts that had fully unlocked their mana bodies. I have an important use for the Hell Legion's experts, Shi Feng said, nodding. An important use? Shi Feng's words confused Kola. He simply couldn't understand what Shi Feng would need the Hell Legion for. In terms of combat power, the Hell Legion's experts were far inferior to Fire Dance's group of 5. In fact, the 5 could beat up the entire Hell Legion handily. At best, the Hell Legion would be useful for raiding dungeons. Fire Dance and the others are indeed very strong after unlocking their mana bodies, but there are many things that cannot be solved with just a handful of players, Shi Feng said, chuckling at the look of disdain Kola was giving the Hell Legion. Fire Dance's group of 5 might be capable of suppressing the Hell Legion now, but once the Hell Legion's members fully unlocked their mana bodies as well, Fire Dance's 5 wouldn't even be able to flee for their lives. Moreover, the Hell Legion's Tier 3 experts fully unlocking their mana bodies was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, what Shi Feng needed was the Hell Legion with its members' mana bodies fully unlocked. Although the Silver Divine Dragon was already his companion, that was only temporary. He still had to complete Auerbach's trial within 4 months to make the contract permanent. Auerbach's trial was no trivial matter. He needed to raise his strength as quickly as possible in order to clear it. Meanwhile, of the methods he could think of to boost his strength, the best one was to complete Solomon's Sword. However, the locations of the remaining fragments of Solomon's Sword were simply too dangerous. The risk of failure was incredibly high if he went to these locations by himself, and even if Fire Dance and the others accompanied him. Hence, he needed the help of the Hell Legion. Moreover, after obtaining the Hell Legion's help, Zero Wing would no longer have to fear the various superpowers on the eastern continent. It could clash with them head-on and contest for the truly important resource points. Zero Wing would not have to rely on just a handful of guild towns and cities to secure resources, which would, in turn, prevent the superpowers from easily suppressing its resource income. Currently, the main source of weapons and equipment was still monsters. However, this would shift to lifestyle players as players reached ever higher levels. If Zero Wing did not secure the necessary resource points early on, with the guild's current scale of development, the various superpowers would eventually rip it to shreds. By the time Shi Feng and Kola's conversation was over, Fire Dance and the others had lured the 5 Earthen Chieftains away from the main group of monsters. Upon seeing this, Hell Rush immediately led his team into action and started clearing out the weaker Earthen giants. As the Earthen Chieftains were gone, The strongest monsters before the tunnel were merely level 112 Great Lords. For the Hell Legion members, whose basic attributes rivaled those of Great Lords and even Grand Lords of the same level, these monsters were a piece of cake. The only inconvenience was their reduced mobility, which slowed their clearing speed by a significant margin. However, with Fire Dance and the others occupying the Earthen Chieftains, the Hell Legion did not face much pressure during battle. The Legion systematically defeated the Earthen Giants, chipping away at their numbers. Roughly 2 hours later, all of the Earthen Giants blocking the tunnel had fallen. Only the 5 Earthen Chieftains remained standing. At this moment, however, each of the Earthen Giants had less than 70% of their HPs remaining. The Hell Legion members could not help but gulp audibly at the sight. Although they knew that Fire Dance and the others could solo the Earthen Giants, they still could not believe their eyes when they saw that each of the Earthen Giants had lost so much HP already. "Alright, quickly get rid of these Earthen Giants," Shi Feng commanded when he noticed the Hell Legion members staring dazedly at Fire Dance's group. Others might not be aware of the condition of Fire Dance's group, but Shi Feng was. Fire Dance and the others might have burned a considerable portion of the Earthen Chieftain's HP already, but they had also expended a significant amount of stamina. With their remaining stamina, finishing off the Earthen Giants all by themselves would be impossible. Ultimately, a group was still necessary to defeat monsters like the Earthen Giants. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered hiring the Hell Legion at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shi Feng's command promptly snapped everyone from the Hell Legion out of their daze, and they sprang to assist Fire Dance's group with the 5 Earthen Chieftains. Fire Dance's group of 5 tanked the 5 Earthen Chieftains while the Hell Legion members helped deal damage from the sidelines. With the participation of the Hell Legion, the Earthen Giants lost HP rapidly. In the end, all 5 Earthen Giants fell within 30 minutes. The Hell Legion members had a much easier time with the Grand Lord-ranked Earthen Chieftains than with the Great Lord-ranked Earthen Giants. When all 5 Earthen Giants collapsed simultaneously, the players' experience bars started filling up rapidly. The amount of EXP the Earthen Giants awarded was much more bountiful than that of Grand Lords of the same level in the outside world. In just 3 seconds, their experience bars had increased by 15%. Far more EXP than they normally would gain after grinding for half a day. Moreover, after the 5 Earthen Chieftains died, they had dropped several dozen items. The abundance of their loot surpassed even that of mythic monsters in the outside world. For a moment, everyone from the Hell Legion was stupefied by this scene. Chapter 2487, Flaming Steel Set. The Earthen Chieftains' loot is actually so abundant? The number of items they dropped is at least triple that of the Grand Lords in the outside world. The Hell Legion members' eyes glowed when they saw the 5 Earthen Chieftains' loot. There were plenty of level 100+ Grand Lords in the outside world, including Star Valley. Killing just one would net players a significant profit. If players were lucky, they might even obtain a piece of Dark Gold equipment. At this stage of the game, level 105 Dark Gold equipment was considered one of the best equipment available even to the various superpowers experts. As for level 100+ epic weapons and equipment, they were things that could be obtained only by killing level 100+ mythics, an incredibly difficult feat. Moreover, the drop rate wasn't 100% either. Usually, all level 100+ epic items a guild obtained would be allocated to the guild's elders. Even the guild's peak experts would not get any. Hence, for most experts right now, level 105 Dark Gold equipment was the best equipment available. Now, the 5 Earthen Chieftains had dropped loot equivalent to that of 15 Grand Lords in the outside world. This was simply a jackpot. Moreover, the Earthen Chieftains also granted much more EXP, equivalent to that of a mythic monster in the outside world. While the Hell Legion members were quietly discussing this matter among themselves, Aqua Rose and the others quickly collected the Earthen Chieftains' loot. Guild leader were quite lucky this time. These 5 Earthen Chieftains dropped a total of 7 pieces of level 110 fine gold equipment and 12 pieces of level 110 secret silver equipment. Among the secret silver equipment is a pair of plate armor gloves that belongs to an 8-piece, level 110 secret silver set equipment. Aqua Rose joyfully reported to Shi Feng after organizing the loot. In regard to this situation, Shi Feng wasn't surprised in the slightest. Although they were currently on the Star Tomb's first floor, this place was still a God Mode regional dungeon. Such loot was very normal. Moreover, nobody had defeated these Earthen Chieftains before. The fact that these Grand Lords dropped level 110 fine gold equipment and level 110 secret silver set equipment was nothing special at all. Level 110 fine gold equipment and level 110 secret silver set equipment? Hell Rush was astonished when he overheard Aqua Rose's report, because the weapons and equipment the Earthen Chieftains dropped were slightly better than even some of the items he had equipped. His equipment already ranked among the best available in the entire Netherworld Empire, only a select few in the guild had better. Moreover, if not for the several pieces of level 100 plus epic items on him, then his equipment might have gotten surpassed altogether. MHM. Here, take a look, Aqua Rose said, smiling as she shared the attribute panels of the equipment they obtained with Hell Rush, not bothering to hide the item's attributes. After all, everyone from Zero Wing had much better equipment. Isn't this flaming steel set a little too powerful? If one of our MTs were to equip it, they could most likely tank an Earthen Chieftain all by themselves. Hell Rush exclaimed, a passionate flame burning in his eyes as he stared at a pair of plate armor gloves. Although the current Hell Legion's MTs were already well equipped, with some even possessing 2 pieces of level 100 plus epic equipment, the overall standard of their equipment would still be inferior by a large margin when compared to the Flaming Steel set. Just the bonuses from the set's 5-piece and 8-piece set effects alone could already rival those from being fully geared in level 110 fine gold equipment. The 5-piece set effect increased not only the user's defense skill by 3 levels but also the user's defense attribute by 25%. While the 8-piece set effect increased the user's HP and physique by 25%. These bonuses allowed MTs to become sturdier with much greater mobility. An MT geared in the Flaming Steel set would have no problems tanking level 110 mythic monsters in the outside world. Upon thinking up to this point, Hell Rush had the urge to have the Hell Legion continue grinding in the Star Tomb even after working for Shi Feng. After all, if the Hell Legion secured a complete Flaming Steel set, it would have a much easier time raiding level 100 super large-scale team dungeons. However, Hell Rush soon shook his head and smiled bitterly. Although the temptation was strong, nobody in the Hell Legion was capable of tanking the Earthen Chieftains right now. If not for Aqua Rose and the others keeping the Grand Lords in check, the Hell Legion would have been helpless against the monsters. If Commander Rush likes this Flaming Steel set, once we collect a full set, I don't mind selling it to you, Shi Feng said, smiling when he saw Hell Rush fall silent after seeing the Flaming Steel set's attributes. Guild Leader Black Flame, are you serious? Hell Rush reflexively sought confirmation. The Flaming Steel set was top-tier set equipment for MTs, which definitely could not be bought in the outside world. In fact, even the various super guilds did not possess such excellent set equipment right now. Moreover, one could use the Flaming Steel set up to level 115. Actually, although the set could grow only up to level 115, with how excellent its attributes were, players should still be able to use it even after reaching level 120. Only epic equipment could surpass the Flaming Steel set. Of course, I never joke. In fact, if the Hell Legion accepts my condition, let alone one Flaming Steel set, even obtaining 20 or 30 sets of set equipment on par with the Flaming Steel set wouldn't be a problem, Shi Feng said, nodding. The Flaming Steel set was indeed excellent for current Tier 3 players. However, as more players fully unlocked their mana bodies, such set equipment would become very common. Not to mention, after a certain point, experts should only be geared in dark gold equipment or set equipment at the very minimum because past level 100, only dark gold equipment or better could adapt to players' mana bodies. If players with fully unlocked mana bodies fought using equipment at the fine gold rank or below, they would rapidly deplete the durability of their equipment. In fact, after reaching Tier 4, players couldn't even consider using secret silver weapons and equipment since such low-caliber weapons and equipment couldn't endure the power of a Tier 4 mana body, becoming useless after the execution of one skill or spell. This was the eternal pain that all expert players that had fully unlocked their mana bodies faced. Only very few players in God's domain had fully unlocked their mana bodies, so players were still unaware that having an overly powerful body was also a problem. 30 sets. Hell Rush could not help being tempted. Previously, he had felt that the 1-month employment period Shi Feng proposed was too long. However, he started wavering after hearing that the Hell Legion could get its hands on 30 sets of set equipment that was on par with the Flaming Steel set equipment. After all, even if the Hell Legion desperately grinded for 1 month, few of its members could reach level 120 in that period. Meanwhile, the Flaming Steel set equipment was top-tier set equipment that could still be used even after players reached level 120. In other words, even after working for Shi Feng for a month, the Hell Legion would retain an edge over the teams of other superpowers when it came to equipment standards. Now, he felt that he needed to have a proper discussion with his superiors in the guild. Since we've taken care of the monsters already, we should head to the second floor. If we continue resting here, the monsters might respawn, Shi Feng said after seeing that everyone was sufficiently rested. Everyone promptly stood up from the ground and entered the tunnel leading to the Star Tomb's second floor. The tunnel was long and narrow. Not only did it not have any monsters, but the ambient mana inside was also incredibly dense. This situation allowed everyone to relax their mental states considerably. Meanwhile, after walking for around 5 minutes, the team arrived on the Star Tomb's second floor, where a strong pressure greeted everyone. Why is the gravity here so much higher than on the first floor? Aqua Rose immediately felt uncomfortable when she stepped onto the second floor. On the first floor, she had barely felt the effects of the increased gravitational force. Now, however, she could actually feel her body growing significantly heavier. Even her mobility was negatively affected. The gravity here is twice as strong as that of the first floor. It seems this floor will be our limit. When Shi Feng sensed the gravitational force on the second floor, he too felt a little surprised. He never thought that the gravity here would be so powerful. From what he knew, the gravitational force players experienced inside the Star Tomb would grow ever higher with each floor they climbed. Hence, ascending the Star Tomb was incredibly difficult. After reaching the fourth floor, even Tier 3 players that had their mana bodies fully unlocked would be incapable of combat without anti-gravity equipment. However, anti-gravity equipment had always been considered incredibly rare in God's domain. In fact, lifestyle players couldn't produce it, as its creation involved ancient technology. Following which, Shi Feng and the others started clearing out the monsters outside the tunnel's exit. Although the gravitational force on the second floor had doubled, the monsters' strength and levels had barely increased. The only obvious difference was the larger number of Great Lord-ranked Earthen giants in each group of monsters. However, this change did not affect Shi Feng and the others at all. Moreover, to everyone's surprise, the monsters here granted at least 3 times more EXP than the monsters found on the first floor. As a result, everyone's leveling speed was now at least 50% faster than if they grinded in the outside world. In addition, the loot the monsters dropped was also much better. Even the Great Lord-ranked Earthen giants occasionally dropped level 110 fine gold equipment. Aside from having better loot, the Star Tomb's second floor had much thinner mana than the first floor. Hence, everyone could actually improve their control over the mana inside their mana bodies as they fought, which inspired everyone to fight much more fervently. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In such a way the team grinded on the second floor for 2 whole days, moving from the outer area to the inner area. Many players on the team leveled up from the abundant EXP. Unfortunately for Shi Feng, as he had reached level 111 already, the amount of EXP he received from the second floor's monsters wasn't particularly abundant. Hence, he did not manage to level up. As if to rub salt in the wound, despite killing numerous Grand Lords, he still didn't obtain a Star of Light during the past 2 days of grinding, contrary to his expectations. Guild Leader, I discovered an inferior legendary treasure chest over here. Fire Dance, who was scouting ahead of the team, reported excitedly through the team chat. An inferior legendary treasure chest? Shi Feng was stunned when he heard Fire Dance's words. How is this possible? According to his memories, the Star Tomb shouldn't possess a single treasure chest, much less an inferior legendary treasure chest. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.